Welcome, welcome. You're here at Super Harry. Today we present to you, What If Harry Collapsed in Great Hall. First day and emergency scan revealed he was Lord of 16 ancient houses. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Floor of the Great Hall. The candles were perfect. That was the first thing Harry noticed when the boats brought them across the lake. Not the castle, not the towers stabbing up into the dark sky, not even the way the black water caught starlight and threw it back in pieces. It was the candles. Hundreds of them, floating without anything to hold them up, burning steady in gold inside the great hall's tall windows. He'd pressed his face close to the glass in the boat and stared, and for one ridiculous moment the tight, bruised thing that lived permanently behind his sternum had loosened just slightly. Then Peeves had thrown a water balloon at someone 3 boats ahead and the moment was gone. Now they were inside, shuffling into the entrance hall in a tight, nervous cluster, robes too stiff and shoes too loud on the stone floor. Harry was somewhere near the middle of the group. He'd learned a long time ago that the middle was safest, not first, not last, not visible enough to attract anything. Ron Weasley was at his elbow, whispering something about the ceiling. Hermione Granger was behind both of them, already correcting Ron's whisper with a better-sourced explanation she'd clearly memorized from Hogwarts, a history. The doors to the great hall swung open. For long tables stretched away from them, packed with students who all turned at once to stare. The ceiling above was identical to the sky outside, dark, scattered with stars, the same effortless magic that made the candles float. Professor McGonagall was already at the front, standing beside a 3-legged stool with a battered old hat balanced on top of it. She looked like someone who had done this 1,000 times and found it neither charming nor tiresome, just procedural. Harry followed the group forward. The stone floor was cold through his shoes. The candle warmth from above didn't quite reach down this far, and the hall smelled like old wood and something rich and savory from the dinner not yet served, and underneath both of those things, something else. Something Harry had no name for. It was the same feeling he'd had on the boat, times 20. A low vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the floor, from the air between the floating candles. He thought it was excitement. He was wrong. "You feel it too," said a voice beside him. He glanced left. A round-faced boy, the one who'd been crying on the train about his toad, was looking at him with wide eyes. Neville. That was the name. Neville Longbottom. "Feel what?" Harry said. Neville opened his mouth, closed it again, shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. Like pressure. Like the whole room is, pressing." Harry almost said it's just nerves because that was the kind of thing people said, the automatic reassuring nothing. But then he registered that the vibration in his bones had gotten stronger in the 20 steps he'd taken through the great hall doors, and that his vision had developed something strange at the edges, not quite blur, not quite color, but a faint shimmer that pulsed in time with something he couldn't identify. "Yeah," he said instead. "I feel it." McGonagall was calling for quiet. The hat was starting its song. Harry tried to focus on the words, something about being clever, being brave, being ambitious, being just, but the vibration was climbing now, up through his feet, through his legs, and the shimmer at the edges of his vision was brightening, and the tight bruised thing behind his sternum, which had never quite fully loosened, was suddenly, pulling. Like a tide going out. Like everything inside him moving toward a single point. Harry put a hand on Neville's arm to steady himself. Neville looked at him. Harry's ears had started ringing. "Don't fall," he told himself. "Don't fall, you've gotten through worse than whatever this is, you can stand up for 5 more minutes while they sort people onto their tables, just stay on your feet." He heard his name called. Or, not his name. Not yet. Abbott, Hannah was being sorted. Boot, Terry. Brown, Lavender. The names were coming slowly, and the hat kept talking, and the vibration was, everywhere. Harry's knees buckled. He caught himself, locked them straight through sheer willpower, but the shimmer wasn't at the edges of his vision anymore. It was filling everything. The floating candles each had a twin. The stone floor was breathing. Neville said something very close to his ear and it sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Finch Fletchley, Justin. Granger, Hermione. He heard the hat shout Gryffindor and a table roar, and he thought distantly, good, she seemed like she'd like it there, and then the roaring table sound stretched and warped and became something else, a long, low harmonic note that he felt in his back teeth, Harry. Neville's voice. Actually Neville, right next to him, gripping his arm hard. Harry, you're very white, mate. I'm fine, Harry said, and didn't recognize his own voice. He felt the floor come up to meet him. He did not feel himself fall. There was no impact, no pain, just the candles overhead going from steady gold to white to nothing, and then a long, featureless dark that smelled faintly of grass and old iron and something he'd smelled once in a dream he couldn't remember. It wasn't frightening. That was the strange part. The dark was quiet. Genuinely quiet, in a way that no cupboard under the stairs ever had been, because in the cupboard he'd always been listening for footsteps. Here there were no footsteps. Here there was nothing waiting for him, and he could just rest. For what felt like a long time, he rested. Then someone pressed 2 fingers to the inside of his wrist and the quiet broke open. The first thing he heard was Madame Pomfrey's voice saying, completely suppressed, all of it, how is this child standing, and then a second voice he didn't recognize saying something in a low, rapid undertone in a language he couldn't identify, and then Dumbledore's voice, very close, saying, Poppy, in a tone that clearly meant carefully and be quiet at the same time. Harry kept his eyes closed and listened. The bindings are deep, the unfamiliar voice said. It was a man, older, accented, Eastern European, maybe, or something further. Precise. Professional. Layered. This isn't one casting, Albus. This is years of work. Systematic suppression of the core, the secondary channels, the ancestral lines, someone very skilled did this to this boy and they did it when he was very young. Can you remove them? Pomfrey's voice, tight. I can identify them, the man said. Removal is not a one-night procedure. But the collapse, a pause. Paper shuffling. The collapse happened because the ambient magic of the castle began interacting with what's underneath the bindings. Hogwarts is old enough that it recognizes what this child is carrying. The wards began resonating with his core the moment he crossed the threshold. The suppression spells aren't strong enough to contain both the castle's recognition and the boy's natural state simultaneously. Meaning the castle tried to wake him up, Pomfrey said. Meaning the castle succeeded, the man said. Which is why he collapsed. The suppression fought back. There was a conflict at the core level. He's fortunate it didn't rupture. Dumbledore was very quiet for a moment. Harry cracked one eye open. He was in the hospital wing. That much was obvious, white curtains, white ceiling, the antiseptic smell under everything. 3 people stood at the foot of his bed. Pomfrey, in her matron's robes, arms crossed like she was physically restraining herself from hexing someone. An old man Harry had never seen before, short and extraordinarily neat in dark robes, with a Gringotts identification badge pinned to his chest and a leather satchel held in both hands. And Dumbledore, who was standing slightly apart from the other 2 and watching Harry's face with an expression that was, careful. Very carefully assembled. Harry opened both eyes. What's a core-level rupture? All 3 of them looked at him. The Gringotts man looked startled. Pomfrey looked relieved. Dumbledore's expression didn't change, which Harry found more interesting than either of the other reactions. Mr. Potter, Pomfrey said, already moving to his bedside with her wand out. Don't sit up yet, I'm going to sit up, Harry said pleasantly, and did. The room tilted once and settled. His head felt strange, too large, somehow, and too light, but his hands were steady on the mattress. The Gringotts man. What did the scan show? The Gringotts man looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore said, very gently, perhaps in the morning, Harry, when you've, what did the scan show? Harry said again. It wasn't a question the second time. Something shifted in the room. The Gringotts man seemed to make a decision. Harry could see it happen, a small straightening, a choice to speak to the person in the bed rather than the person by the wall. He stepped forward. My name is Ragnulf, he said. I'm a senior curse breaker in the Inheritance and Lineage Division of Gringotts London. I was contacted tonight by Headmaster Dumbledore when your collapse proved resistant to standard diagnostic charms. He set his satchel on the end of the bed, unclipped it, drew out a long scroll of parchment covered in columns of script that glowed faintly amber. I performed a full lineage encore diagnostic. Mr. Potter, the results are substantial. How substantial? Harry said. Ragnulf handed him the scroll. Harry took it. He was aware of Dumbledore going very still. The scroll was covered in names. House names, some he recognized from somewhere in the vague reading he'd done on the train, some he'd never heard at all, and beside each name was a column of numbers he didn't understand yet and a column of status markers. Most of the status markers read, in deep amber script, suppressed. Illegal binding in effect. He read the list. House Potter. House Black. House Peveril. House Gryffindor. House Slytherin. House Ravenclaw. House Hufflepuff, the founders, he realized, and something very cold moved through his chest, House Gaunt. House Emrys. House Pendragon. House Flammel. House Lefay. House Selwyn. House Ollivander. House Ignotus. 16 lines. 16 names. All of them with the same status marker. He looked up at Ragnulf. Someone put bindings on all of these. Yes. When I was a baby. From the magical signatures, Ragnulf said, without inflection, without editorializing, giving Harry the clean facts like someone who understood that clean facts were a form of respect, the initial bindings were placed on you at approximately 15 months of age. They have been refreshed twice since, once when you were approximately 4 years old, and again when you were 7. Pomfrey made a sound like a tea kettle 1 second from boiling. Harry didn't look at Dumbledore. He wanted to, but he made himself not, because if he looked now he'd be reacting and he didn't want to react. He wanted to understand first. 16 houses, he said. What does that mean? Legally. In terms of Wisengamot representation, Ragnulf said, each ancient and most noble house holds a hereditary seat. The lord of such a house may vote that seat directly, or assign a proxy. You are the heir, and in most cases, the only surviving magical line, for all 16 houses listed. He paused. If the bindings are removed and the lordships formally claimed, you would hold 16 Wisengamot seats. The current Wisengamot has 51 voting members. You would, alone, constitute a blocking third. The room was very quiet. The houses of the 4 founders, Harry said slowly, working it through aloud, because it helped to say the pieces out loud. That means, Slytherin. I'm heir to Slytherin. The last surviving line, yes, Ragnulf confirmed. Through the Gaunt family, which is also listed, and which connects through several suppressed branches back to your own maternal line through a convergence that the bindings were specifically designed to sever and conceal. My mother's family, Harry said. Your mother was a Muggleborn witch, Ragnulf said carefully, but the magic doesn't operate on Muggleborn status the way people commonly assume. The Gaunt connection runs through your maternal grandmother's line, which had several squib and nominally Muggle branches that official genealogy, his voice stayed perfectly level, was not inclined to acknowledge. Harry looked at the scroll again. House Emrys. Merlin. Also known as Emrys, yes, Ragnulf said. House Emrys is dormant but unextinct. You are its heir. And Pendragon. A later line than the legendary association implies, but yes. The magical house of Pendragon survived through a squib branch that maintained enough latent magic to pass the inheritance forward. And Le Fay, Harry said. Morgan Le Fay. House Le Fay has been considered extinct for 3 centuries, Ragnolf said. It is not. You are it. Harry set the scroll down on the blanket. He breathed in once, slowly, through his nose. The room waited. The candles in the hospital wing were regular candles in brackets on the walls, and they didn't float, and they were slightly less bright than the ones in the great hall, and he could feel the castle all around him like the world's slowest heartbeat, steady and very, very old. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore's face was kind. Dumbledore's face was always kind. But behind the kind expression, something was working. Harry could see it now, could see the calculation under the warmth, and he thought of the suppressions refreshed at age 4, and again at 7, and he looked at the old man who had been responsible for placing him with the Dursleys, who had certainly known about his parents' magical lines, who had sent Hagrid to collect him without anyone from the magical legal system to represent his interests. Headmaster, Harry said. Did you know about this? Harry, Dumbledore said gently, there is a great deal of context that would help. Yes or no, Harry said. A beat. Not the full extent, Dumbledore said. That's not yes or no, Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes, always warm, always that particular shade of blue, looked at him steadily. I knew some of it, he said. I believed it was in your best interest, right, Harry said. He picked up the scroll again, rolled it carefully, looked at Ragnolf. Can I keep this? It is your property, Ragnolf said. I'll provide a certified copy to Gringotts files and one to you. The original findings belong to the subject of the diagnostic. Thank you. Harry held the scroll with both hands. What happens to the bindings tonight? I cannot safely remove them tonight, Ragnolf said. Full removal requires a prepared ritual space, the correct counter-sequences for each suppression layer, and at minimum several hours of careful work. Attempting to strip them here and now would be like, he considered, removing every stitch from a healing wound simultaneously. The shock to your system could be severe. But they're not holding the way they were, Harry said. The castle did something. Correct. The castle's resonance cracked the outermost suppression layer. Your core is, I would describe it as waking up, slowly, in fragments. Ragnolf's voice carried something that was almost respect. The fact that you are sitting up and asking coherent questions strongly suggests your core is integrating the partial release without catastrophic difficulty. You are, Mr. Potter, extraordinarily resilient. He spent 10 years being slowly crushed, Pomfrey said flatly, and it was the first time she'd spoken in several minutes and her voice had the quality of something held under control with significant effort. The resilience developed as a response to the suppression. This is not a compliment to the situation. No, Harry said. It isn't. He looked at his hands on top of the blanket. They were the same hands they'd always been, slightly too thin, nails bitten too short, a scar on the left thumb from a kitchen accident he'd been punished for despite not causing it. Nothing looked different. But the vibration in his bones that had built to a roar in the great hall was still there, quieter now, and the shimmer he'd felt in his vision before he fell was gone, replaced by something else, a clarity. A sharpness. The world looked the same as it always had. But he felt like someone who'd been reading in bad light for their whole life and just found a better lamp. Ragnolf, he said. I want to formally begin the process of claiming all 16 houses. Harry, Dumbledore began. When I'm 11, Harry said, still looking at Ragnolf and not at Dumbledore, can I do that? The age of magical majority in Britain is 17, Ragnolf said. However, in the case of an ancient and most noble lordship where the heir is the sole surviving line, there is a provision in the Goblin Wizard Accords of 1752 that allows an underage heir to make a formal petition for provisional lordship, to be ratified in full upon reaching majority. The petition requires witness documentation, filing with the Ministry Inheritance Office, and Gringotts certification. He paused. As of tonight, you have the Gringotts certification. The rest is paperwork. How long does the paperwork take? If filed promptly and without obstruction. Ragnolf tilted his head. 48 hours. And if obstructed? That would depend on who was doing the obstructing and through what channels. Ragnolf's voice was perfectly, professionally neutral. It would also depend on whether the heir had competent legal representation. Who handles legal representation for situations like this? Gringotts maintains a list of certified magical inheritance solicitors, Ragnolf said. I can provide that list. Please, Harry said. Tonight, if possible. I'll owl it within the hour. Dumbledore said, Harry, I would strongly recommend that before you take any formal steps, we discuss, Headmaster. Harry finally turned to look at the old man fully. He didn't feel angry, exactly. Anger was something he knew well, it was hot and it made you clumsy. This was something cooler, and more useful. I heard what Ragnolf said. Someone put bindings on me 3 times before I was 8 years old. Someone who knew my lineage, who knew what I was heir to, who knew that suppressing it would keep me less than I was meant to be. He held up the scroll. I don't know yet who cast those spells. But I know they were refreshed at 7, and by then I was at the Dursleys, and the only person in the magical world who knew where I was is you. The hospital wing was completely still. Madame Pomfrey's expression had gone absolutely rigid. Ragnolf had become very interested in the clasp of his satchel. Dumbledore's face, and this was the thing Harry would remember later, would turn over in his mind at odd moments for years, didn't fall. It didn't crumble or collapse or go guilty. It simply settled into something older and heavier and more honest than the usual warmth, something that looked almost like grief, and he said, very quietly, I have never meant you harm, Harry. I believe you, Harry said. I don't think harm is what you meant. I think you had a plan, and I was in it, and the plan needed me to be a certain size. He settled back against the headboard. I won't be that size. But I don't think you're my enemy. He looked at Ragnolf. Please send the list of solicitors. And, he hesitated, then decided, send it directly to me, not through the school owl system. I'll arrange a private delivery, Ragnolf said, and there was something in his voice that was absolutely, definitely professional respect. Gringotts is at your service, Lord Potter. The title sat in the air of the hospital wing like a bell that had just been rung. Harry decided he'd think about what it meant later. Right now his head was still too large and too light, and the castle was still doing its low-frequency heartbeat around him, and he was 11 years old and had collapsed in front of half the school and found out in one night that everything about his life had been, in one way or another, constructed for him rather than by him. He was tired. He also felt, for reasons he couldn't entirely articulate, the best he'd felt since, possibly since before he could remember feeling anything. Pomfrey chased Dumbledore and Ragnolf out with the efficient mercilessness of someone who had a patient and intended to keep them in one piece regardless of political complications. Dumbledore went without argument, which told Harry something. Ragnolf went with a small, precise bow in Harry's direction that felt strangely significant. When the curtain closed and Pomfrey came back to his bedside with a potion in a small glass, Harry said, "What's this?" "Core stabilizer," she said. "To keep the partial release of the suppression from causing overnight fluctuations. It will taste like asparagus and regret. Drink all of it." He drank all of it. It did taste like asparagus and regret. Pomfrey watched him drink, and when the glass was empty she took it back and stood there for a moment with it in her hands, looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. "You should know," she said finally, "that I perform a standard diagnostic on all incoming first years. A simple one, no lineage scan, no core assessment, just health. And I have been performing those diagnostics for 26 years. A pause. Every year, I look at those results, and every year they are unremarkable except for the usual first-year anxieties and dietary deficiencies." She was very still. "Your results tonight, before Ragnolf arrived, before the lineage scan, your basic health diagnostic showed me a child whose magical core has been under sustained compressive stress for the entire period of its development. Like a muscle that's been held in a fist. Her jaw was tight. I want you to know that I reported that to Dumbledore 6 years ago, when I scanned your records on learning you were coming to Hogwarts. I was told it had been addressed. Harry looked at her. Was it? Clearly not, she said. Her voice was very, very controlled. I'm sorry, Mr. Potter. I don't say that because I think it accomplishes anything. I say it because you deserve to hear it. He thought about saying it's fine, the reflexive, automatic thing. The thing he always said. Thank you, he said instead. For doing the scan. For calling Ragnolf. Yeah. Thank you. She nodded once, briskly, turned the lamp by the bed down to its lowest setting, and left him in the near dark. He lay there with the scroll on the blanket beside him and the castle breathing all around him, and he stared at the ceiling for a long time. House Peveril, he thought. The Peverils. He'd never heard that name before tonight. 3 brothers, hadn't there been, a story, he couldn't quite pull it up from wherever it had lodged during all his reading on the train. He made a mental note to find it. House Emery's. House Le Fay. Merlin. Morgan Le Fay. He was heir to both of them. The most famous wizard in history and his half-sister, the one all the stories made into a villain, who Harry was willing to bet hadn't been that simple. House Gryffindor. House Slytherin. House Ravenclaw. House Hufflepuff. He thought of the hat on the stool. He hadn't been sorted. In the chaos of his collapse, the sorting had, presumably finished without him. He'd have to be sorted tomorrow, or separately, or, he wondered what the hat would say about him now. House Black. He stopped on that one. The scroll had listed it as suppressed, illegal binding like the rest, but alongside the House Black entry there had been a subnotation in Ragnolf's careful script, see also, current status of Lord Black, Sirius Orion Black 3, under separate file, flagged, Gringotts probate concern. Sirius Black. Harry had a blurred, second-hand impression of that name. Someone had said something on the train about a mass murderer, a you-know-who supporter who'd sold his parents out, 12 muggles, but current status of Lord Black meant that as of Ragnolf's filing, Sirius Black was still officially Lord Black. Which meant, he sat up. If Sirius Black was still officially Lord Black, then either he was alive and free, which everyone seemed to agree he wasn't, or he was alive and imprisoned, in which case he was imprisoned as a sitting lord without. Harry's mind moved quickly through what little he knew of magical law from his frantic reading on the train, without ever having been tried. Because if he'd been tried and convicted, the house would have been dissolved or transferred to the next heir, not left in probate limbo. He hadn't been tried. Sirius Black had been put in Azkaban without a trial. Harry's hands had curled into the blanket without him noticing. He made himself unclench them, finger by finger. Later, he told himself. You don't have enough information yet. Get the solicitor. Get the full file from Gringotts. Then move. He lay back down. He was cold, so he pulled the blanket up, and he held the scroll against his chest like the first genuinely his thing he'd ever owned, and he looked at the ceiling, and the castle breathed, and slowly, not because he felt safe, but because he was very tired and his body had been through something significant and it was a deeply reasonable thing to do, he fell asleep. He woke up to voices. Can't just let them in there, this is a medical, they've been sitting outside the door since midnight, Poppy, and I've told them, tell them again. Harry put both feet on the cold floor and pulled the curtain aside. 3 people were standing at the entrance to the hospital wing. Pomfrey was squared up in the doorway. On the other side of her, in various states of disheveled, were Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, and Neville Longbottom. Ron was still wearing his sorting robes. Hermione had her Gryffindor badge already somehow pinned to her chest and was holding a stack of library books against one arm. Neville was carrying Trevor the Toad. They all saw Harry at the same moment. You're alive. Ron said. He's very clearly alive, Ronald, Hermione said. I told you, you also said he might be in a coma, Ron said. I said the diagnostic results suggested, you said coma, Harry. Neville's voice, quieter than both of theirs. He was looking at Harry with the same wide, direct look he'd had in the Great Hall, before everything went sideways. Are you okay? Harry stood there in the hospital wing doorway in his slightly too large pajamas. Pomfrey had put him in the school's spare set, clearly, and he looked at the three of them and something in his chest did something complicated and warm and not entirely comfortable. Yeah, he said. I'm okay. You collapsed, Hermione said. She pushed past Pomfrey with the determination of someone who had decided that the information she was delivering constituted a medical emergency. In the middle of the Great Hall. The whole first-year group saw. McGonagall caught you before you hit the floor, but it was very dramatic, Harry. Everyone's saying all sorts of things. What are they saying? Harry asked. That you fainted from nerves, Ron offered. That you were cursed, Neville said. That you deliberately collapsed to avoid being sorted, Hermione said, looking like she personally found this theory offensive. Which is ridiculous, because a person can't simply choose to. Was I sorted? Harry asked. They all exchanged a look. No, Hermione said. McGonagall said it would happen tomorrow. Separately. A pause. What did happen? Because it wasn't fainting from nerves, was it? Harry looked at the three of them. Ron, who'd shared a compartment with him on the train and given him half his sandwiches. Hermione, who'd helped him find his toad and already seemed to treat information as both a weapon and a gift. Neville, who'd noticed the pressure before anyone else said anything. He thought about all the ways he could deflect. I'll tell you later. It's complicated. It's fine. All the habitual small fictions. Come in, he said. Both of you. Pomfrey's not going to. Yes, she is, he amended, because Pomfrey had moved, but she'll just have to be angry at me about it, which she can add to the list. He looked at the matron. 5 minutes. Pomfrey looked at him for a long moment with an expression that suggested she was adding this to a mental list of battles not worth fighting. 5 minutes, she said. And if I catch any of them sitting on the bed, standing only, Harry agreed. They stood. All four of them, crowded between Harry's bed and the curtain, while Harry held the scroll he'd woken up still clutching and told them what Ragnolf had said. Not everything, not Sirius Black, not the part about who might have placed the bindings, not his conversation with Dumbledore. Just the facts. 16 houses. Suppressed since infancy. The castle woke him up. The bindings were cracking. When he stopped, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Ron said, House Gryffindor. You're literally heir to, and Slytherin, Hermione said. She had the particular expression of someone whose brain was operating at a speed that slightly alarmed even herself. Harry, do you understand what the Wisengamot seats mean? 16 seats is, I read about this, the maximum concentration of voting seats ever held by a single house in recorded history was, 4, said Neville. Everyone looked at him. He went slightly pink. I know about this, he said, with the careful dignity of someone who had been underestimated so consistently that admitting knowledge felt like an exposure. My grandmother talks about Wisengamot politics constantly. 4 is the most anyone's ever held. There are people who've held 2 that have basically run the entire. He stopped. He looked at Harry. 16. 16, Harry confirmed. Another silence. Outside the hospital wing windows, the sky was showing the first very faint suggestion of gray. 4 in the morning, maybe. 5. Ron said, slowly, so you're kind of the most powerful person in the whole wizarding world. In terms of legal standing, potentially, Hermione said, and Harry could tell she was trying to be measured about it and finding it difficult. Though power isn't just legal standing, obviously, there's also magical power, which, well, she looked at Harry's hands, and Harry followed her gaze, and noticed that the tips of his fingers were very faintly luminescent. Not glowing, exactly. Just, lit. From inside. He hadn't noticed that before. He turned his hands over, looked at the pale inner skin of his wrists, found the same faint light there, steady and quiet. "Oh," he said. "Yeah," said Neville. Is that the bindings?" Ron asked. "The partial release," Harry said. The castle cracked the outer layer. So whatever's underneath is, waking up. Slowly. He closed his hands, opened them. The light didn't change. Ragnolf says the full removal will take several hours in a ritual space. But this is what's coming through just from the crack. Hermione looked at him with an expression that was half academic fascination and half something that might, in less controlled circumstances, have been awe. "Harry," she said. "You need a plan." "I know," he said. "A legal plan and a political plan and a magical plan," she said. "Because once this is public, and it's going to be public, it's already been hours and news travels fast in magical society, there are going to be people who want to control this. Or stop it. Or, I know," Harry said again. "Ragnolf is sending me a list of solicitors. I'm going to need help going through it." "I'll help," Hermione said immediately. "Me too," said Neville, quietly, firmly, in a way that suggested he'd made the decision before the sentence started. Ron looked at Harry with an expression that was clearly going through several feelings at once. The slight daze of being 11 years old and finding out his new friend was sort of royalty, the Weasley instinct toward disrupting any establishment that was being too pleased with itself, and underneath both of those something simpler and more straightforward. He grinned. "Mate," he said, "the look on Malfoy's face is going to be brilliant." Harry laughed. It was the first time he'd laughed since, he couldn't actually remember the last time. It felt strange in his chest, unfamiliar, like a joint that hadn't been moved in too long. He liked it. "Right," he said. "Let's." Pomfrey materialized from the other side of the curtain with the precision of someone who had let 5 minutes run to 7 and was done being generous. "Out," she said. "All of you. Including the Toad, Mr. Longbottom, and I mean that personally." They went. Neville clutched Trevor with one hand and gave Harry a small, steady nod over his shoulder that meant something Harry would have been hard-pressed to put into words, something like "I'm here," something like "we're in this." Harry sat back on the edge of the bed. The faint light in his hands pulsed once, gently, in time with the slow heartbeat of the castle. He looked at the scroll on the blanket. 16 names. He picked it up, and he started reading from the beginning. The sorting happened at breakfast, before the rest of the school arrived in the hall. McGonagall came for him herself, walking through the hospital wing with her particular brand of brisk compassion. She wasn't unkind, she was just relentlessly practical, and practicality was its own form of care. Harry followed her down through the still quiet corridors of the castle, past portraits who watched him pass with expressions more attentive than he expected, past suits of armor and enormous windows going from grey to pale gold as the sun came up. He felt the castle the whole way. Not the painful, overwhelming resonance of last night. Something steadier. More like recognition. The stone walls didn't look different, but they felt different, and he kept catching himself running his fingertips along them as he walked, which was probably strange, and he didn't stop. The great hall was empty. All 4 tables laid for breakfast, but no one at them yet. The enchanted ceiling showed a pale early morning sky, washed out and beautiful. The candles were still burning. McGonagall placed the stool in the middle of the empty floor and settled the hat on top of it. In the silence of the huge room, with no crowd to perform for, the hat seemed smaller than it had looked last night. More personal. "When you're ready, Mr. Potter," McGonagall said, and stepped back. Harry sat on the stool. The hat dropped over his eyes and everything went dim. "Well," said a voice in his ear, rich and amused and very, very old. "I've been waiting for you." Apparently everyone has, Harry said. Quite. You've had an eventful night. A pause, not the pause of something thinking, but something listening, reaching into the parts of him that didn't have words. I can feel it even through the suppressions. What you are underneath those bindings. Another pause. Do you know, I've sorted a great many students over 1,000 years, and I have sorted exactly one other person who made me sit up in my own lining. Who? Harry asked. I don't share that, the hat said, and there was humor in it. But you're not the only one who's ever carried more than anyone gave them credit for. It's a long tradition in this place. A beat. Now. You have 4 choices. You know the qualities. I know them, Harry said. What you're less certain about is which ones are yours, the hat said, not unkindly. You've spent a long time not being allowed to know yourself. That landed like something physical. Harry sat with it for a moment. Courage, the hat mused. You have it in abundance. But you use it quietly, you don't perform it. That's not Gryffindor courage, exactly, that's deeper, older, the hat seemed to consider. Cunning, you have that too, though you'd never claim it. You just spent 20 minutes lying with your eyes closed listening to a conversation and building a strategy from it. That's not what people picture when they picture Slytherin, but that's what Salazar built his house for. I'm heir to both of them anyway, Harry said. Yes, the hat said, with what sounded like genuine delight. You are. Which makes this less of a placement decision and more of, where do I want to be? Harry said. Exactly. He thought about it. He actually thought, rather than reaching for the automatic answer, not Slytherin, flinching away from it because of what everyone associated with the name. He sat in the empty great hall with the castle breathing around him and he thought about what Gryffindor had built its house for and what Slytherin had and whether they were really so different and, Gryffindor, he said. Why? Because courage without heart is just aggression, he said. And I've spent enough time around aggression. The hat was quiet for a moment. Well, it said. That's the most self-aware answer I've gotten from an 11-year-old in about 400 years. A beat. Better be, Gryffindor, it announced, loud enough to ring off the ceiling, even in the empty hall. McGonagall's expression did something that wasn't quite a smile but was clearly the distant relative of one. Harry took the hat off, set it back on the stool, and stood up. The first students would be coming down for breakfast in about 20 minutes. In a few hours, Ragnolf's letter would arrive. In a few days, the wizarding world was going to find out that Harry Potter was alive, was at Hogwarts, had spent 11 years being deliberately kept small, and wasn't anymore. He walked toward the Gryffindor table, chose a seat near the middle, and poured himself a glass of pumpkin juice. He was 11 years old, heir to 16 ancient houses, with a magical core that was slowly burning through everything that had been built around it like sunlight through ice. He was hungry. He helped himself to toast. Chapter 2, The Weight of Names. The letter arrived during charms. Harry had expected it at breakfast, then at the start of morning classes, and when neither happened he'd spent the first 40 minutes of Professor Flitwick's introduction to Wingardium Leviosa in a state of surface calm attention while underneath he was running through everything Ragnolf had said and everything he still didn't know, which was most of it. Flitwick was a good teacher. Harry noticed this even through the distraction. The tiny professor had genuine enthusiasm for his subject, the kind that made you feel like the magic was a shared discovery rather than a lesson being administered. He stood on his pile of books at the front of the classroom and explained the wand motion with his whole body, a little conductor in miniature, and the first years watched him with the wide-eyed focus of people encountering something genuinely new. Harry watched too. He copied the motion with his wand, once, twice, felt the familiar odd current run from his palm down the length of the willow wood. 11 inches. Holly and Phoenix Feather, Ollivander had said, with an expression that suggested he found the match more interesting than he was letting on. Harry had a feeling, after last night, that he understood the expression better now. Now, your feathers, everyone, a gentle swish, remember, swish and flick, the classroom filled with the sound of 30-odd wands being waved at varying levels of confidence. Feathers rose, wobbled, dropped, rose again. Beside Harry, Hermione's feather shot up to the ceiling on the first attempt and stayed there, bobbing with tremendous satisfaction. On his other side, Ron's feather rolled miserably to one side and fell off the desk. Harry looked at his feather. He did the motion, murmured the incantation, and the feather rose, but it didn't just rise. It went up sharply, almost to the ceiling, hung there for a half-second, and then every other feather in the room rose too. Not dramatically, not violently. Just, sympathetically, as if Harry's magic had pushed the air and all the feathers had caught the current. Half the class noticed. Flitwick definitely noticed. He looked at Harry with an expression that moved quickly from surprise to intense professional interest. Harry set his wand down on the desk. The other feathers slowly settled. Ron's fell back off his desk. "Well," Flitwick said, recovering with the ease of someone who'd been teaching for decades, "an excellent first attempt from many of you. Mr. Potter, would you demonstrate again, please, just the wand motion?" "Sorry, Professor," Harry said. "I think I should probably keep my wand down for now." Flitwick looked at him very carefully. Whatever he saw in Harry's face, or perhaps felt in the ambient magic of the room, made him nod, once, and move on without pushing it. Ron leaned sideways. "What was that?" "Part of the reason I collapsed last night," Harry said, keeping his voice low. "The bindings cracking means things are a bit unpredictable. Right now." "Unpredictable, like affecting the whole room?" Ron said. "Apparently." Ron stared at him for a moment. Then, in a tone that managed to be both impressed and deeply anxious, "Mate." "Yeah," Harry said. The owl found him 20 minutes later, dropping silently through the high window over Flitwick's head and landing directly on Harry's desk with the precision of something that had been given explicit instructions about where to go. It was not a Hogwarts owl. It was a Gringotts owl, dark gray, stocky, with the slightly severe expression of someone who considered themselves on official business at all times. It stuck out its leg with professional disinterest. Harry detached the letter. The owl departed without waiting for a response, which told him Gringotts hadn't expected one. The envelope was made of something slightly heavier than ordinary parchment, sealed with dark wax pressed with the Gringotts goblin sigil, and addressed in sharp angular script, "Harry J. Potter, Gryffindor Tower, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, private and sealed, not for interception." The last part glowed faintly amber for a moment after he touched it, and then went dark, which he assumed meant it had verified his identity to its satisfaction. Flitwick was watching him from the front of the room with the air of a man exercising considerable self-restraint. "May I read this now, Professor?" Harry asked. "I think," Flitwick said, in the tone of someone who had pieced together a great deal from one afternoon in the staff room, "that perhaps you should." Harry broke the seal. Inside were 3 documents. The first was the certified copy of the lineage scan, the same amber-scripted columns he'd read in the hospital wing, but formalized now, with Gringotts' official seals on every page. At the bottom, in a space he hadn't noticed on the original scroll, was a line that read, "Core Assessment, Classification omitted pending full binding removal. Preliminary Indication, Category unassigned. See Evaluator's Note." He turned to the evaluator's note. It was brief, in Ragnolf's handwriting. Standard core classification runs from Category 1, minimum magical expression, to Category 7, exceptional, rare, historically perhaps 12 individuals per century. Your preliminary reading, taken through active suppression layers which were significantly compromising output, registers above Category 7. I have not written a number in this space because I do not yet have reliable data. I recommend formal core assessment following full binding removal. Harry read that twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his breast pocket. The second document was the list of solicitors Ragnolf had promised, 12 names, each with a short annotation. He scanned them quickly. Most were names he didn't recognize, with credentials listed in terms he'd need Hermione to decode. One name had a small star next to it, Augusta Longbottom, recommended for ancient house matters, extensive Wisengamot experience, known to take cases of legal irregularity with considerable vigor. Note, personal connection to current Hogwarts student, discretion advised. Harry stopped on that name. He read it again. Neville's grandmother. He wasn't sure whether to find that funny or alarming, so he decided to find it both and moved to the third document. This one was different. Not a certificate, not a list. A formal letter on heavy cream parchment, folded twice and marked with a second seal. This one read, not amber, with a different symbol, something Harry recognized after a moment as the heraldic device of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Inside the fold was a handwritten note from Ragnulf. This arrived at Gringotts this morning. As the flagged probate concern in House Black's file, it was legally required to pass to you. I have made no other copies. Harry unfolded the letter. It was dated 6 days ago and addressed to the Gringotts Probate Department from one Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. It was short, formal, and concerned a petition that had apparently been filed, and denied, 3 times in the previous decade. The petition was for a formal Wisengamot hearing on the case of Sirius Orion Black III, currently held in Azkaban prison on charges of mass murder and service to Lord Voldemort. The petition had been denied each time by the chief warlock of the Wisengamot, who was responsible for setting the hearing schedule. The chief warlock of the Wisengamot was Albus Dumbledore. Harry set the letter down on the desk. He was very still for a moment. Around him the charms class continued, feathers rising and falling, Flitwick's voice moving through corrections, the scratch of quills on parchment, Ron's feather finally, triumphantly levitating 3 inches above the desk. He picked the letter up again. Read it twice more to make sure he'd understood it correctly. He had. He folded all 3 documents, put them in his bag under his charms textbook, and spent the rest of the lesson sitting with his hands flat on the desk and his wand untouched, while the magic in his bones hummed steadily like a kept promise. Lunch was chaotic. Not chaotic in the great hall itself, which was its usual loud, overlapping, first weeks of term energy. Chaotic in the space immediately around Harry, which had developed a gravitational quality he was already finding both exhausting and interesting. Word had spread. He'd been naive to think it wouldn't, a first year collapsing dramatically in the middle of the sorting, being carried out by the headmaster himself, missing the sorting and being separately sorted at dawn, a Gringotts owl arriving visibly in the middle of charms, the faint luminescence at his fingertips that several people had now noticed and were discussing in stage whispers. The wizarding world ran on gossip the way engines ran on fuel, and Harry had apparently just dropped a significant quantity of high-grade material into the tank. At the Gryffindor table, the other first years had rearranged themselves around him in ways that he suspected they hadn't consciously planned. Hermione was on his right, a book propped against her pumpkin juice, but she was watching the room over the top of it. Neville was across from him, quiet, eating his soup in a way that managed to communicate I'm here and paying attention without being obvious about it. Ron was on his left, currently managing both his lunch and a very poor attempt at not eavesdropping on the second years behind them who were talking about Harry. Heard it was a curse, some kind of delayed. No, my dad wrote me this morning, he said Gringotts sent someone, like an actual, he's glowing, he's not glowing, he's just, his hands are literally. Ron leaned sideways to Harry. You're a topic of conversation, he said, with the easy comfort of someone who'd grown up in a large family and understood that attention was inevitable and mostly not worth managing. I noticed, Harry said. Fred and George are at the far end of the table and they keep looking over, Ron reported. Which means they know something, which means Dad or Percy wrote them. What do they know? Dunno. But they're not coming over, which means they decided not to. He sounded faintly surprised. They always come over. Fred and George always come over. Harry looked down the table. The twins, identical, red-haired, with the particular alert stillness of people deciding how to calibrate their energy in a new situation, caught his eye at the same moment. Neither of them grinned. Neither of them waved. One of them, he couldn't tell which, gave him a very small, very deliberate nod, the kind that meant we see you and we're working something out simultaneously. Harry nodded back. What was the name on that list, he said to Hermione, quietly, next to Augusta Longbottom. Hermione didn't look up from her book. I couldn't read your letter, Harry. I'm telling you what was in it, Harry said. What's the word for a solicitor who specializes in ancient house legal matters? A Wisengamot certified inheritance advocate, she said immediately. They're different from standard magical solicitors. They have to have specific training in hereditary magical law, which is distinct from statute law, and they have to be certified by both the Ministry and Gringotts because they operate at the intersection of both systems. She paused. Why? Neville, Harry said. Neville looked up. Does your grandmother take cases? Neville's spoon stopped moving. He had a very specific expression that was clearly re-evaluating several things at once. Yes, he said slowly. She's semi-retired, but she keeps her certification active. She says the Wisengamot is run by incompetence and someone needs to be ready. He paused. Why? Ragnulf recommended her, Harry said. On the list of solicitors. She's top of the list. Several things moved across Neville's face. The dominant emotion, Harry thought, was a complicated mix of pride and something that looked almost like relief, as if Harry naming his grandmother as capable was filling in a gap that had been created by years of other people talking about her differently. She'd do it, Neville said. If you asked her. She wouldn't say no to this. Can you write to her today? I can write at her, Neville said. Whether she writes back before she arrives is a different question. When Gran decides something needs doing, she tends to skip the correspondence stage. He paused. She might just show up. That's fine, Harry said. It might be a bit, Neville searched for the word, much. The situation is already a bit much, Harry said. One more thing doesn't change the scale. Neville looked at him for a moment. Then he picked his quill up from beside his bowl, turned his charms notes over to the back page, and started writing. Dumbledore asked to see Harry at 3. The message came through McGonagall, delivered in the corridor after transfiguration, with an expression that was carefully professional and therefore communicated several things McGonagall probably hadn't meant it to. She was worried. She was uncertain whose side she was on, if sides were even the right framework. She was a person who believed in the institution of Hogwarts and the authority of its headmaster with a genuine, deep conviction, and she was currently encountering evidence that the institution and the authority had done something she couldn't easily rationalize. 3 o'clock, Harry, she said. Gargoyle on the 3rd floor. Yes, Professor, Harry said. He had an hour. He spent it in the library with Hermione, who had been working on this since breakfast with the focused energy of someone who had found a problem perfectly suited to her particular brain. She had 3 books open on the table and a length of parchment half covered in her small, dense handwriting, and when Harry sat down across from her she pushed one of the books toward him without looking up. The Wisengamot, Structure, Precedent, and the Role of Ancient Houses by Hieronymus Granger, she said. No relation. Chapter 7, Provisional Lordships for Underage Heirs. Read from page 143. He read. The 1752 Goblin Wizard Accords provision Ragnulf had cited was one of 3 pathways available to an underage heir. The simplest was what Ragnulf had outlined: petition, documentation, Gringotts certification. But there was a second pathway, invoked only twice in the Accord's history, which was considerably more powerful. If an underage heir could demonstrate active magical inheritance, meaning the house's magic was already responding to them independently, without formal claim, then the provisional lordship could bypass the standard ministry filing process entirely and be granted through Gringotts alone, with notification to rather than approval from the ministry. Harry's fingers had gone luminescent again. He held his hand flat on the open page of the book and watched the light pulse softly under his skin. Hermione, he said. She looked up. Looked at his hand. Active magical inheritance, she said, before he could say it. The castle recognized me before I got 2 feet through the door, he said. The diagnostic results, she said, leaning forward. Ragnolf's evaluation noted core resonance with the castle's existing wards, that's textbook active magical inheritance under the Accord's definition. She was already flipping back in the book to cross-reference. If Ragnolf certified that, not just the lineage but the active inheritance, then you don't need the ministry filing at all. You could have the lordships confirmed entirely through Gringotts. Which means Dumbledore can't obstruct it, Harry said. She met his eyes. No, she said. He couldn't. They looked at each other across the library table. Write to Ragnolf, she said. Today. Ask specifically whether the active inheritance provision applies and whether he observed sufficient evidence of core-castle resonance during the diagnostic to certify it. Already composing it in my head, Harry said. Also, she said, slightly more carefully, Harry, the 4 founders' houses. Have you thought about what that actually means, magically? Because when I was reading last night, I know I should have slept but I couldn't, I found something interesting. The 4 founders put their own magical inheritance into the school's foundations. It's why Hogwarts is sentient, in a way, why the staircases move, why the castle adapts. Their magic is literally in the walls. She paused. And you're heir to all 4. Harry looked at the ceiling. The library ceiling was lower and more solid than the great halls, but he had the same sensation, the castle, all around him, old and breathing and entirely aware that he was there. So when the castle recognized me, he said slowly. It wasn't just the family magic, she said. It was the founder's magic recognizing itself. In you. She looked slightly awed despite herself, which for Hermione was the equivalent of most people's complete speechlessness. The castle tried to wake you up because some part of it knew you were the right person to wake up. Harry thought about that for a while. Right, he said. That's going to make the Dumbledore meeting interesting. The headmaster's office was round and full of too many things. That was Harry's primary impression, not of grandeur, but of accumulation. Instruments on every surface, portraits covering every inch of wall, books stacked in ways that suggested they had arrived and been placed and then never moved again. A large bird on a perch in the corner, currently watching Harry with intelligent orange eyes. The bird was beautiful and Harry would normally have been immediately interested in it, but right now he had other priorities. Dumbledore was at his desk. He rose when Harry entered, gestured to the chair across from him, and Harry sat in it with the 3 documents from Ragnolf's letter in his left breast pocket and a composed expression that cost him less effort than it would have 12 hours ago. Thank you for coming, Harry. Of course, Harry said. How are you feeling? Genuine concern in the voice, and Harry believed the genuineness of it, that was the complicated part, that the concern was real. Well, Harry said. Thank you. I imagine you've had a great deal to process, Dumbledore said. He sat back, hands folded, and Harry recognized the posture as one a person used when they were trying to project calm into a room. The revelations of last night were considerable, Harry said. Yes. A beat. I've been reading about the Wisengamot. A small, careful pause. Have you? The provisional lordship provision in the 1752 Accords, Harry said. I'm going to pursue it. I wanted you to hear that from me directly rather than through other channels. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. In the portraits behind him, several painted figures were paying very close attention while attempting to look like they weren't. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice had shifted slightly, still gentle, but with something underneath that was working harder than the gentleness. I understand the impulse, and your frustration is, I'm not frustrated, Harry said. It was true. I'm planning. What I want to make sure you understand, Dumbledore said, is that the wizarding world is complicated. The political landscape, particularly in the aftermath of Voldemort's fall, is delicate in ways that a rapid consolidation of power in any single figure. I'm 11, Harry said. Your age is part of what concerns me, Dumbledore said smoothly. These are adult political systems. The Wizengamot is not. You're the chief warlock, Harry said. Dumbledore nodded. I am. You denied Amelia Bones' petition for a Sirius Black trial 3 times, Harry said. In that role. The office was very quiet. The instruments continued their small, secretive movements. The portrait figures had all collectively stopped pretending not to listen. Dumbledore's expression didn't collapse. It changed, slowly, like weather moving in. The warmth was still there, underpinning everything, but something more honest had surfaced over it, and he looked at Harry with the eyes of someone who had just registered that the child across the desk was not going to be managed and had perhaps not been manageable for some time. Yes, he said. Why? Harry asked. Because at the time I believed, Dumbledore paused, choosing. I believed a public trial would be destabilizing. Sirius Black was Voldemort's most trusted lieutenant, was he? Harry said. Because he's House Black's lord. And his house is in my lineage file, which means Gringotts has records on his status. And his status is still Lord Black, which means he was never formally convicted, which means the Ministry put him in Azkaban without a trial. Harry, I read the Accords last night, Harry said. A sitting lord of an ancient and most noble house cannot be imprisoned, stripped of title, or, he was pulling the language from memory, which surprised even him, or subjected to incarceration without the full procedural rights afforded under Wizengamot Charter, Section 12, Subsection 4. He paused. He's been there for 10 years. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You've been busy, he said quietly. Someone took 10 years from me, Harry said. I'm making up for it. He held the old man's gaze and didn't look away and didn't soften it. I'm not your enemy, Headmaster. I meant that last night and I mean it now. But I'm going to petition for his trial. I have the legal standing to do it in a way that can't be denied 3 more times. There are things about Sirius Black that you don't know, Dumbledore said. Tell me one of them, Harry said. A pause. Then, he was your parents' secret keeper. I know what a secret keeper is, Harry said. Hermione explained it this morning. Hermione had, in fact, been extremely thorough on the subject. Fidelius charm. One person entrusted with a secret that could unmake a hiding place. If the secret keeper gave the location to Voldemort, the charm was broken. If he was the secret keeper, Harry said, and he betrayed them, then there's evidence. Magic leaves traces. The Fidelius charm is one of the most heavily documented spells in existence. That's a trial's worth of evidence, not an indefinite detention. He paused. And if he didn't do it, Harry, Dumbledore said, very quietly. Then he's been in Azkaban for 10 years for something he didn't do, and I'm his heir's closest living magical relative, and that makes it my problem. He stood up. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. He said it without heat. Without anger. Just the clean, flat statement of someone who had made a decision. Dumbledore looked up at him from the desk, and in that moment Harry saw something he hadn't expected in the old man's face. It wasn't calculation, it wasn't worry, it wasn't even manipulation. It was something that looked almost like relief. As if some part of Albus Dumbledore, the part that was tired and old and had been making difficult choices for a very long time alone, was looking at this 11-year-old boy with the burning hands and thinking, finally, someone else who will carry some of this. Sit down, Harry, Dumbledore said. Harry sat. Tell me what you need from me. Harry blinked. That was not the sentence he'd expected. You won't obstruct the trial petition. I will not. Or the lordship filing. I will not obstruct that either, Dumbledore said. He seemed to be choosing his next words carefully, not as evasion but as precision. I want to be honest with you, I have made choices about your life that were not mine to make. I believed, I still believe, they were made in the interest of the greater good. But I am beginning to understand that the greater good and your good are not the same calculation. He paused. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? Harry asked. Someone younger, Dumbledore said. In every sense that matters. A pause. What do you need from me, Harry? Harry thought about it. Don't lie to me, he said. I don't need you to tell me everything, I understand that some things aren't mine to know yet. But don't lie. I will do my best, Dumbledore said, which was, Harry noted, not quite a yes. And access, Harry said. When Ragnolf does the full binding removal, I want it done here, at Hogwarts, in whatever space is safest. I want Pomfrey present and I want a Gringotts witness. That can be arranged. And a meeting with the heads of my houses, Harry said. My 4 school houses. I know it's irregular. I'd like it anyway. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that was now predominantly, and very genuinely, curious. McGonagall, Snape, Flitwick, and Sprout. Yes. May I ask why? Because they run the houses that I'm technically patriarch of, Harry said, and I'd like them to know that I have no intention of interfering, and that whatever I say publicly about the house's lineage has nothing to do with current house politics. They deserve to hear that directly. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. You are 11 years old, he said, and he said it not dismissively but with a kind of wondering precision. Yes, Harry said. And I have 16 houses and a friend in Azkaban and a lot of catching up to do. He stood again. Thank you for seeing me. He was at the door when Dumbledore said, Harry. He stopped but didn't turn. I am sorry, Dumbledore said. That is not sufficient. But it is true. Harry stood with his hand on the door for a moment. I know, he said. And went. Dinner was louder than breakfast. The Gryffindor table had found a new energy, the first week of term crackle, which Harry was learning was distinct from ordinary loudness, a specific frequency of excitement and anxiety and performance that 11 new students brought into a house of older ones. People wanted to know him. There were third years leaning across with friendly questions and a sixth-year prefect who'd stopped by twice under the guise of checking on the first years but was clearly deeply curious about Harry specifically, and several second years who'd been in the hall during the collapse and had appointed themselves unofficial witnesses to events. Harry answered questions pleasantly, briefly, and without content, which was a skill he'd developed over years of navigating the Dursleys and which translated surprisingly well to this context. Yes, he was fine. No, he didn't know what had happened exactly. Yes, it had been surprising. No, he hadn't been sorted with everyone else because they wanted to make sure he was well first. He drank his pumpkin juice and passed the roast potatoes and smiled at people, and it cost him almost nothing. Under the table, Hermione passed him a folded piece of parchment. He opened it in his lap. Her handwriting, I cross-referenced the Castle Ward architecture chapter in Hogwarts, a history with what you told me about the castle resonance during the diagnostic. There's a room. On the 7th floor, it's called the Come and Go room in the older texts, though it seems to be mostly forgotten. The castle creates what you need inside it. If the castle is responding to you the way Ragnolf's notes indicate, you might be able to use it for the binding removal. More controlled than the hospital wing. He wrote back, how do you find out about these things? She wrote back, books, Harry. He wrote back, right. She wrote back, also, I found a name. In the Founders chapter. There's a passage about the magical compact that binds the Founders' lines to the school. It says, quote, the compact shall lie dormant until such time as a natural heir of sufficient standing arrives to inherit the full mantle. It's been dormant for 600 years. A pause, then in slightly messier handwriting, as if she'd added it quickly, I think the castle was waiting for you specifically. Harry read that twice. Then he folded the note and put it in his pocket with the Gringotts documents, and he looked up at the enchanted ceiling, tonight clear and dark, with the first stars coming through, and thought about what it meant to be waited for. He wasn't sure yet. But it didn't feel like a burden. It felt, for the first time in his life, like it might be the opposite of one. Later, In the Gryffindor common room, the fire was going and most of the first years had drifted into their own conversations, and Harry sat in one of the window seats with his knees up and the castle outside going dark and silver under a half-moon. Neville came and sat in the other window seat without being invited, which Harry had already learned was Neville's version of asking. He didn't ask, he just quietly inserted himself and waited to see if you'd send him away. Harry didn't send him away. "Did you write to your grandmother?" he asked. "This afternoon," Neville said. "She wrote back already." "Already?" "Like I said," Neville said. "Gran doesn't really do the correspondence stage." He held out a slightly crumpled piece of parchment. "She says, here," he smoothed it out. "She says, tell him I'll be at Gringotts Thursday morning and he should have Ragnolf arrange a meeting. Tell him to bring the certified copy and don't let anyone see it before I do. Also tell him Albus Dumbledore has been running the Wizengamot like his private filing cabinet for 30 years and it's about time someone did something about it." He lowered the parchment. "She also asked if I was eating enough vegetables." Harry felt the corner of his mouth pull up. "She sounds like someone I'd like." "She's terrifying," Neville said, with unmistakable pride. "But she's good. She's actually really good at what she does. People dismiss her because she's old and she wears a lot of hats, but she's argued 23 cases before the Wizengamot and she's never lost one." 23 cases, no losses, Harry said. "That's exactly who I want." Neville looked out the window. The grounds were very dark below, and the lake was a black mirror, and somewhere in the castle the staircases were moving through their nightly rearrangements. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," Harry said. "When you found out, about the houses, all of them, were you scared?" Harry thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "Which probably sounds strange." "No," Neville said. "I think I understand it. When I got my Hogwarts letter, when I actually got it, I mean, I nearly didn't, I had my accidental magic late and people kept saying maybe I was a squib." He said it without the flinch Harry would have expected, just matter-of-factly. "When the letter came, I wasn't scared. I was just relieved. Like something had been confirmed." He paused. "Maybe it was like that." "It was exactly like that," Harry said. He looked at his hands, which were still faintly lit, dimmer now in the firelight from across the room but still there, still visible. "Like finding out there's a reason you always felt too large for the space you were in." "Yeah," Neville said. They sat with the night outside and the fire behind them, and it wasn't a comfortable silence exactly, there was too much happening for comfortable, but it was an honest one, which was better. "Neville," Harry said, "your family is House Longbottom." "Ancient and noble, yes," Neville said. "Not most noble, we lost the most noble rating about 200 years back when the main line nearly died out." He said it with the ease of someone who'd heard family history used as a source of shame often enough to have decided it wasn't. "My parents they were Aurors. They were some of the best." His voice didn't change, but something around his eyes did. "They're at St. Mungo's. Long-term ward." Harry looked at him. "Bellatrix Lestrange," Neville said. "And her husband and the Crouch boy. After Voldemort fell, they went looking for information about where he went. They used the Cruciatus until," he stopped. "My parents don't know who I am. They haven't for 10 years. The common room fire crackled. Somewhere up the stairs, Ron and Dean Thomas were having a loud, good-natured argument about Quidditch. "I'm sorry," Harry said. He didn't qualify it or add to it. Just that. "Thanks," Neville said. He looked back out the window. "The Lestranges are in Azkaban. Proper trials, proper convictions. But Bellatrix she has political connections. There've been rumblings. My gran worries they'll get out somehow." A pause. "Having someone with actual legal standing in the Wizengamot, someone who can't be pushed around by the people who'd push for early release, she'd sleep better." "She won't have to worry about that," Harry said quietly. Neville looked at him. Harry looked back. "I mean it," Harry said. Neville nodded, once. Then he looked back out at the dark lake, and Harry looked too, and they stayed there until the fire had burned down to coals and the rest of the first years had gone to bed, keeping their own quiet counsel about the things that mattered and the things they were going to do about them. At 11:30, in the particular deep quiet of a Hogwarts night, Harry sat at the desk in his dormitory while Ron and the others slept, and he wrote 2 letters. The first was to Ragnolf, asking specifically about the active inheritance provision and requesting Thursday's meeting be confirmed for Augusta Longbottom. He also asked, at the bottom, as precisely as he could, whether it was possible to request a full estate and records review of House Black, including any documentation regarding the Fidelius charm associated with his parents' deaths. The second letter he stared at for a long time before writing. He didn't know if it would reach anyone. He didn't know, for certain, that the person was even sane after 10 years of Azkaban. But he'd read enough tonight to know that as the heir apparent of House Black, he had the legal right to request a private communication channel with the current Lord, regardless of the Lord's imprisonment status. Gringotts would facilitate it if he asked. He wrote, "My name is Harry Potter. I'm told you knew my parents. I'm told you were their secret keeper. I don't know yet what happened, but I know you've been in Azkaban for 10 years without a trial, which is illegal regardless of what you did or didn't do. I'm working on getting that fixed. I thought you should know someone is. I'm 11. I know that's probably not very reassuring. But I own 16 houses and I'm getting a very good solicitor, so I think it'll be okay." He stopped. Then he added, "My father was James Potter. I have his hair and apparently his talent for getting into trouble before the school year properly starts. I'm sorry I didn't find this sooner." Harry he folded it, sealed it, wrote via Gringotts' private channel, House Black probate file on the outside, and put it with the Gringotts letter to go out in the morning. Then he put his head down on the desk, and did not mean to fall asleep, and did, with the light from his hands pressing softly into the wood grain beneath him, and the castle breathing long and slow around them all. Chapter 3, The political animal Lucius Malfoy arrived on a Wednesday. Harry knew he was coming before the man even cleared the front gates, because the castle told him, not in words, not even in images, just a sudden shift in the ambient pressure, the way a room changes when someone walks into it who intends to take up more space than they're allocated. He was in the middle of breakfast, halfway through a piece of toast, and he set it down and looked at the entrance hall doors and waited. Ron noticed. "What?" "Someone's coming," Harry said. "To the school." "Through the gates just now," Harry said. He wasn't entirely sure how he knew this. The knowing had arrived the same way the castle's residents had been arriving since Monday, not dramatically, not with any of the theatrical shimmer he'd felt the first night, just quietly, like information that had always been available and his brain had finally learned to receive. "Someone who isn't here for good reasons." Hermione looked up from her book, which she propped against her juice glass in flagrant violation of the spirit if not the letter of breakfast table etiquette. "How do you know that?" "The castle doesn't feel good about whoever it is," Harry said, then paused, because that sounded strange even to him. "I know that sounds, no," she said. "Actually it doesn't. The founders put sentient wards in the foundations. If you're carrying their magic and those wards are responding to you, then the ward's threat assessment would be, she worked through it quickly, available to you at some level. Instinctively." She looked at him. "What does it feel like?" "Like standing in a kitchen when someone you don't like comes through the front door," Harry said. "Before you hear them. That feeling." "Premonitional ward resonance," Hermione said, already sounding like she was composing the footnote. "There's no published documentation of that response in a living person. You might be the only case in 6 centuries. "Fascinating," Harry said dryly. "Who do you think it is?" Neville had gone rather still across the table. He was looking at the high table where the professors sat, specifically at Snape, who had looked up from his own breakfast with a sharpness that suggested he also felt something, a different kind of sensitivity, Harry thought, or maybe just the kind of political instinct that developed in people who'd spent years watching their backs. Malfoy, Neville said quietly. He said it the way you'd say a weather forecast. His father. Lucius. Why him? Ron asked. Because he's on the board of governors, Neville said. He has access to the school that most people don't. And because, he paused, if what's in the papers this morning is what I think it is, what papers? Harry and Hermione said simultaneously. Neville reached into his bag and produced a slightly crumpled copy of the Daily Prophet, which he'd apparently had since breakfast started and not mentioned. He flattened it on the table. The front page headline read, in letters large enough to qualify as shouting, Harry Potter alive, Gringotts confirms emergency lineage scan, Lord of Ancient Houses. Below it, in smaller text, special report, what the wizarding world's most famous orphan might actually be worth. Harry stared at it. That's a ghoulish subheading. Rita Skeeter wrote it, Hermione said, reading over his shoulder. Her expression had taken on the particular quality of someone reading something that offended them on multiple simultaneous levels. She's sourced an anonymous contact within Gringotts, which is completely illegal. Gringotts' confidentiality is enshrined in the Accords, and she's saying you're heir to at least 6 of the most powerful houses in magical Britain, but she doesn't have the full number. She scanned further. She says you collapsed due to dark curse contamination, which is completely wrong, and she says Dumbledore is, she's calling it a mysterious overnight meeting with an unnamed Gringotts official, and implying, does it matter what she's implying? Harry said. It matters what people believe she's implying, Hermione said. Fine. What's the rest of it? She read in silence for a moment. She's quoted Lucius Malfoy, she said, in a tone of profound distaste. He says, she read, the Board of Governors is naturally deeply concerned for young Mr. Potter's welfare and will be reviewing the events of Monday evening with the full attention the matter deserves. And then there's a quote from someone called Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic, saying that the Ministry is monitoring the situation. Monitoring the situation, Harry repeated. Ministry speak for panicking and not wanting to admit it, Ron said knowledgeably. They're both coming, Harry said. Fudge too? Ron asked. I don't know. But Malfoy is definitely here. Harry could feel it, closer now, the castle's quiet hostility to the presence sharpening. He'll be up to the school in about 5 minutes. He looked at the high table. Dumbledore was reading his own copy of the Prophet with an expression of maddening serenity. As if sensing Harry's gaze, he looked up, and their eyes met, and Dumbledore gave the very slightest of nods. An acknowledgement. I know. I see it. Harry looked back at his plate. He picked up his toast and finished it. Right, he said. Hermione, the active inheritance provision. Is the language in the Accord specific enough to constitute a self-executing claim? She blinked. In what sense? If the magic is already active, if the castle is already responding, does the claim formally exist regardless of paperwork? Like, is the legal reality already true, and the paperwork just registers it? She thought about it very fast. He could see her running through the text she'd read. Yes, she said. The 1752 Accords, the active inheritance clause, it says the provisional lordship attaches to the heir upon demonstration of active inheritance. The filing is notification, not creation. She paused. Which means as of Monday night when the castle recognized me, Harry said, I was technically already lord of all 16 houses. The table was quiet for a moment. Yeah, Ron said. That's going to make the Malfoy meeting interesting. Lucius Malfoy was exactly what Harry had expected from the small, furious look on Draco Malfoy's face every time Harry had caught him looking across the hall this week. The elder Malfoy was tall, expensive-looking, and moved through the entrance hall with the particular ease of someone who had practiced the choreography of being important. Long white blonde hair. Black robes that cost more than most people's monthly income. A cane with a silver snake head that Harry immediately clocked as not just decorative. McGonagall was intercepting him at the foot of the main staircase. Harry was coming down those stairs at the same time, which was not an accident. He'd left the Great Hall 2 minutes after deciding to, told Hermione and Neville he'd see them in Transfiguration, and taken the staircase at a pace that was unhurried but purposeful. He arrived at the bottom as McGonagall and Malfoy were in the middle of a brisk exchange, and he stepped off the last stair and stood there, and Lucius Malfoy looked at him the way you looked at something you'd been expecting and had prepared for but which had arrived at an inconvenient angle. "Mr. Potter," McGonagall said, with an expression that combined several things, relief, wariness, and the particular look of someone watching a chess match where one of the pieces had started moving itself. "You have class in 20 minutes, I know," Harry said pleasantly. He looked at Lucius Malfoy. "Good morning." Malfoy looked at him for a long moment. His expression was controlled, impressively so. Whatever he'd expected from Harry, Harry could see him recalibrating it in real time. People expected the orphan, the small boy, the famous but overwhelmed child. Harry was 11 and underfed and wearing school robes that fit him slightly awkwardly, and he was looking up at this tall, powerful, perfectly assembled man without a trace of intimidation on his face. "Mr. Potter," Malfoy said. His voice was exactly what Harry expected, smooth, cultured, with an undertone that was used to being listened to. "I'm delighted to see you're well. Your collapse on Monday was deeply concerning to us all." "Was it?" Harry said. "The Board of Governors takes the welfare of all Hogwarts students very seriously," Malfoy said, and there it was, the framing. Student. Not heir, not lord, not anything that carried weight. Just a student. A child. Something that could be discussed about rather than with. "We'll be reviewing the circumstances of Monday evening quite carefully." "What specifically are you planning to review?" Harry asked. The question landed slightly wrong in Malfoy's carefully prepared script. Harry could see it, the slight adjustment, the recalculation. He'd expected deflection, maybe. Nervousness. Not direct questions. "The safety protocols," Malfoy said. "The diagnostic procedures. Whether the appropriate, did you know about the suppression bindings before the diagnostic?" Harry asked. McGonagall went very still. Malfoy's eyes moved, just briefly, a fraction of a second, and that was enough. Harry filed it and moved on. Because they were quite sophisticated, Harry said conversationally. "Ragnolf, he's the senior curse breaker from Gringotts who performed the diagnostic," he said. "Someone very skilled cast them. Someone with access to me when I was very young. Which is a small pool of people." "I wouldn't know anything about that," Malfoy said, and his voice was perfectly level. "Of course," Harry said. "I'm sure you wouldn't." He smiled at Malfoy with an expression that was friendly and meant nothing. "Was there something specific you wanted to discuss?" "I do have class soon." The entrance hall was very quiet. The suits of armor on the walls had the posture of people pretending not to listen. Several students were visible at the top of the stairs, not coming down. Malfoy looked at him for a long moment, and Harry saw him make a decision. The genteel approach was going nowhere. Time to try wait. "I wanted to discuss your welfare, Mr. Potter," Malfoy said, and now the smoothness had a different quality, still polished, but with something harder underneath it. "You've had a significant shock. There are people, many people of considerable standing, who would be quite happy to help you navigate the complications you now find yourself in. Guide you. Ensure you have proper support." "People of considerable standing," Harry said. "Indeed. Who have my best interests at heart," Harry said. "Naturally. Like the people who put bindings on me when I was 15 months old." Harry said. The entrance hall went from quiet to something that wasn't quite silence, more like the specific held breath of a room full of people processing several things at once. Malfoy's expression didn't crack. It was a very good expression, technically. But his left hand tightened on the snake-headed cane, just slightly, and Harry noticed. "I'm going to be quite straightforward with you," Harry said, because he was tired of the careful dance and because straightforwardness had the additional advantage of being deeply unsettling to people who'd built their entire approach around strategic indirection. "I know what I am legally. I know what the active inheritance provision in the 1752 Accords means. I have a solicitor, a very good one, and a Gringotts cursebreaker who has already certified my claim. I'm 11 and I'm in school and I intend to get an education, and none of that changes the fact that as of Monday evening I am legally lord of 16 houses. Including houses that hold considerably more Wisengamot weight than House Malfoy." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. "So the offer of guidance," he said, "is kind. But I'm fine. Thank you for coming." He looked at McGonagall. "Professor, I'll head to Transfiguration. Don't want to be late." "No," McGonagall said, in a voice that was doing its level best to be normal and wasn't quite making it. "You don't." Harry walked up the stairs. He didn't look back. He counted the steps and kept his pace even, and when he reached the first landing and turned the corner he allowed himself one slow breath out, and the light in his hands pulsed once, and he kept walking. He heard about the rest of the encounter through Neville at lunch, who had gotten it from Percy Weasley, who had been on prefect duty in the entrance hall. Malfoy had stayed another 40 minutes, meeting with Dumbledore in the headmaster's office. Percy hadn't been able to hear the content but had described the body language of Malfoy leaving as controlled in a way that meant he was furious. Dumbledore, Percy had apparently noted, had looked serene. Which either meant the meeting had gone in Dumbledore's favor or Dumbledore had perfected the appearance of serenity regardless of circumstances, and Harry wasn't sure which option was more likely. "Did Draco know his father was coming?" Harry asked. "I think he found out this morning," Hermione said. "He was at the Slytherin table looking quite," she chose carefully, "complicated about it." Harry glanced down the hall. The Slytherin table was at the far side of the room, and Draco Malfoy was at the near end of it, and he was looking at Harry with an expression that Harry genuinely couldn't read. Not the performed contempt of the first few days, not the aggressive posturing he'd attempted on the train. Something with more layers than either of those. Harry held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. "He's not the problem," Harry said. "His father is," Neville agreed. "His father's the symptom," Harry said. "The problem is the system that made Lucius Malfoy think he could walk into a school and try to recruit an 11-year-old into his political operation the day after that 11-year-old found out he'd been magically suppressed since infancy." He picked up his fork. "The system is the problem. Malfoy's just a man who's good at using it." "Very philosophical for someone who just publicly dismantled him in the entrance hall before 9 in the morning, Ron said. "I wasn't trying to dismantle him," Harry said. "I know," Ron said. "That's the most horrifying part. Transfiguration was genuinely interesting, which helped." McGonagall had a gift for the subject that Harry suspected went beyond mere expertise into something more personal. The way she moved through the material had the quality of someone talking about something they loved, brisk and unsentimental about it but unmistakably in love. She turned her desk into a pig and back again in the first 3 minutes of class, and the room went absolutely silent with the particular attention of people who've just seen something that reorganized their concept of what was possible. "Transfiguration," she said, "is not about changing things. It is about understanding what things actually are at a fundamental level and working with that reality rather than against it. A desk is not simply a desk. It is wood, and before that, a tree, and at its most fundamental it is a collection of energies in a particular configuration. Change the configuration and you change the desk." She looked around the room. "Begin with your matchsticks. The goal today is a needle. The first step is understanding that you are not making a needle. You are revealing the needle that the matchstick always had the potential to be." Harry looked at his matchstick. He thought about what she'd just said. He thought about bindings placed on him at 15 months old. He thought about a diagnostic scan that couldn't fit him into any category. He thought about a castle that had recognized him and tried to wake him up. He thought about the matchstick. Then he put his wand flat on the desk, held his hand 2 inches above the matchstick, and thought very clearly about needles. The matchstick went silver. Not all at once, it moved along its length like frost spreading, the wood grain becoming metal grain, the blunt end sharpening, the texture shifting. The whole thing took about 4 seconds. When it was done, a perfect steel needle sat on his desk. McGonagall saw it from the front of the room. She walked over with a controlled expression. She picked up the needle. She examined it. "Wandless," she said. "Yes, Professor. At 11. Apparently." She set the needle back down. She looked at Harry. He looked back. Something passed between them, not the entrance hall dynamic from this morning, not the careful professional distance of a teacher managing a complicated situation. Something more direct. She was a woman who had seen exceptional magic before. She was recalibrating what exceptional meant. 5 points to Gryffindor, she said crisply, and moved on. Ron stared at him. "You did that without your wand." "I know. That's not, first years can't, I know." "Harry." "Ron." Harry picked up his own wand because the class hadn't asked for wandless and he wasn't going to show off just to show off. It's the partial release. Things are looser than normal. He paused. "That's a slightly concerning sentence, isn't it?" "Only slightly," Hermione said, and she sounded like she was writing 17 different things in her head simultaneously. "Actually, it's fascinating from a magical theory perspective because the suppression was specifically targeting the standard one-channel pathways, and without those restrictions your magic is finding alternative." "Later," Harry said. "Later," she agreed, without any indication she'd actually stopped thinking about it. The second letter from Ragnolf arrived Thursday morning, delivered via the same dark official owl, while Harry was getting dressed. He read it standing up. Ragnolf confirmed the active inheritance provision applied. He outlined the formal language of the Gringotts certification. He noted that the Thursday meeting with Augusta Longbottom was confirmed for 11 o'clock at the Hogsmeade Gringotts branch office. Harry read that last line and looked at the time. He looked at his class schedule. He looked at the letter again. He went to McGonagall. She was in her office, which was small and extremely tidy, with a cup of tea that had gone slightly cold and a stack of papers that suggested she'd been working since early morning. She looked up when Harry knocked and leaned in the doorway. "Mr. Potter." "Professor. I have a meeting at the Gringotts branch in Hogsmeade at 11. I need to leave the castle grounds." McGonagall put her pen down. "You need to, Mrs. Augusta Longbottom is my solicitor," Harry said. "She confirmed yesterday. The meeting is to go over the formal lordship claim documentation before I file. First years do not leave the castle grounds without explicit headmaster." "I know," Harry said. "I'm not asking you to break the rules. I'm asking you to bring it to the headmaster and tell him I need permission for a legal meeting that can't wait." He paused. "If he says no, I'll write to Ragnolf and explain the meeting needs to move to the castle. But Ragnolf's already coming to Hogsmeade and Mrs. Longbottom is coming from London and I'd rather not ask them to adjust on 12 hours' notice if it can be helped." McGonagall looked at him with the expression she'd been developing all week, the one that was professionally neutral and personally somewhere between admiring and deeply concerned. She picked up her pen. Then put it down again. "Sit down, Mr. Potter." He sat. "When I was a young woman," she said, "I was taught to believe that the most dangerous thing a person could be was powerful without patience." She looked at him steadily. "I've been revising that position since Monday. I think now that the most dangerous thing is power combined with judgment, because power without judgment just makes a mess, but power with good judgment makes things that cannot be undone." A pause. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "You're telling me to be careful," Harry said. "I'm telling you that being careful and being right are not the same thing," she said. "You can be entirely right and still move too fast for the situation to absorb safely. The people around you need time to adjust. The people around me have had 10 years to adjust, Harry said. They used it to keep things the way they were. McGonagall held his gaze for a long moment. I'll speak to the headmaster, she said. Permission came through at 9:30. McGonagall herself walked Harry down to the gates at 11:15, not because Harry needed an escort, he had a feeling she'd have fought anyone who suggested he did, but because she was coming with him. She'd taken her own cloak from her office with the economy of motion of someone who had made a decision and intended to see it through. They walked to Hogsmeade in the thin October sunshine, mostly in silence. The path curved around the edge of the Black Lake, which was steel-grey in the morning light, and Harry could see the squid somewhere near the surface, one tentative tentacle breaking the water and then withdrawing. The lake knows too, doesn't it, he said. McGonagall, walking half a pace ahead, said, the lake is sentient in a manner of speaking. The castle's awareness extends to the grounds. A pause. You feel it. All of it, Harry said. It's been getting stronger since Monday. After the binding removal, I imagine, indeed, she said, in a tone that suggested she was not going to pursue that line of thought right now. The Gringotts branch in Hogsmeade was smaller than the London one but had the same fundamental quality, a building that was extremely clear about whose territory it was. The goblin at the front desk looked at Harry, looked at the Gringotts correspondence in his hand, and directed him immediately to a private meeting room in the back without any of the usual procedure. Ragnolf was already there. And Augusta Longbottom was already there, which meant she'd arrived early, which Harry had a feeling was simply what she did. Augusta Longbottom was significant. That was the word. She occupied the room differently from most people Harry had met. She was older, with iron-grey hair and sharp eyes behind rectangular glasses, wearing formal robes and a hat with a single decisive feather in it, and she looked at Harry when he entered with an expression that was conducting an assessment rapid enough to be almost impolite and had reached a conclusion before he'd fully crossed the threshold. She stood. Extended her hand. Harry Potter, she said. My grandson told me about you in 3 sentences and I decided before I finished reading to take the case. Sit down. We have a great deal to cover. He sat down. McGonagall sat beside him. Ragnolf had the document spread across the table, the lineage scan, the core assessment, the active inheritance certification, and several additional pages Harry hadn't seen, dense with legal notation. I've reviewed everything Ragnolf sent, Augusta said, already moving, fingers sorting through the documents with the efficiency of someone who didn't believe in preamble. The active inheritance provision applies, clearly. The castle resonance documentation Ragnolf has prepared is comprehensive and will satisfy any challenge. The claim, as I understand the accords, attached at the moment the castle responded, Monday evening. That's my reading too, Harry said. She looked at him over her glasses. Good. We agree. The filing is notification, not creation. The ministry cannot deny, delay, or interfere with a Gringotts-certified active inheritance claim. What they can do is challenge the evidence, so Ragnolf's documentation needs to be flawless. She looked at Ragnolf. Is it flawless? It is, Ragnolf said, with the calm of someone who had never submitted substandard work and took the question as procedural rather than personal. Good. She moved to the next page. The 16 houses. I want to discuss the political reality of this, because it's not just a legal matter. She looked at Harry. You understand what 16 Wisengamot seats means in practical terms. A blocking third, Harry said. A decisive blocking third, she corrected. The current balance in the Wisengamot is delicate. There are approximately 18 votes currently controlled by what I'll call the traditional faction, meaning the old families who've been running things in their own interests for the last 40 years. The moderate faction holds about 20. The reformist faction holds perhaps 10, and they're disorganized. She folded her hands. You walk in with 16 votes and every faction in that chamber needs to either win you or neutralize you. There is no other option. They'll try to neutralize me first, Harry said. Of course they will, she said approvingly. Lucius Malfoy already came to the school, I hear. This morning, McGonagall said, in a tone that communicated a great deal in 2 syllables. He'll try the legal challenge route, Augusta said. Claim the active inheritance certification is insufficient, request a ministry review, drag it out through procedural channels. It won't work, the Accord supersede ministry procedure on this specific question, but it will take time, and time is what they want. Every week that you're not formally seated is a week they're using to consolidate their positions. She looked at Harry. Which is why I'm going to recommend we file today. Today, Harry said. Right now, she said. Ragnulf can certify and file through Gringotts channels before we leave this room. The ministry will receive notification before lunchtime. They will not be prepared for it, which is entirely intentional. She paused. Any objections? One question, Harry said. Sirius Black. Augusta didn't blink. What about him? House Black is in my file. He's the current lord and he's in Azkaban without a trial. He looked at her directly. What's the process for demanding a trial as his heir presumptive? Augusta Longbottom looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, not surprise exactly, more like the particular look of someone encountering a combination of facts they'd thought about separately but hadn't yet put together. She looked at Ragnulf. Is the heir presumptive standing clear? She asked. Given the active inheritance certification for House Black, Ragnulf said, and the documented suppression of the lineage connection, yes. Mr. Potter's standing as heir presumptive to House Black is legally secure. Under the Wisengamot Charter, a sitting lord or their heir presumptive can petition for a hearing review. And as a sitting lord of 15 other ancient houses, Augusta said slowly, each of which carries independent petition rights, even if Black's standing were challenged, the petition could be filed 16 times over and couldn't be denied all of them. She looked at Harry with an expression that was fully, completely, professionally delighted. You didn't just want to free him, she said. I don't know if he's innocent, Harry said honestly. I want him to have had a trial. He was a person before any of this and he was given no process. That's wrong regardless of what he did. Yes, she said simply. It is. She looked back at the documents. We file the lordship claim today. I'll begin the Black petition process today as well. The Wisengamot session next month is when we make our formal entrance. She paused. When is the binding removal scheduled? I spoke with Ragnulf, Harry said. We were thinking next weekend. At the castle. The binding removal should happen before the Wisengamot session, she said firmly. Not because of the political optics, though those matter, but because going into that chamber with active suppression bindings on you is like going into a legal proceeding with your hands tied. She looked at him over her glasses. After the removal, what can we expect in terms of magical expression? We don't know, Ragnulf said. The core assessment couldn't complete with the suppression in place. The preliminary indication was, he paused, choosing the word, exceptional. Define exceptional, Augusta said. Above Category 7, Ragnulf said. Silence. McGonagall, who had been sitting beside Harry with the focused attention of someone taking mental notes, looked at Ragnulf and then at Harry and then at the middle distance, working something through. Above Category 7, Augusta repeated. The scale doesn't extend above 7 in any modern classification system, Ragnulf said. Because no modern individual has required the additional categories. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then Augusta Longbottom put both hands flat on the table and looked at Harry with an expression that was completely, professionally calm and also, underneath that, something that he thought might be the first genuine awe he'd seen from an adult since all of this began. File the claim, she said to Ragnulf, without breaking eye contact with Harry. File it right now. The ministry notification reached Cornelius Fudge's office at 12:47, which was how Harry knew because Hermione had written to a contact. She'd already developed contacts, which was remarkable and slightly alarming, and the contact had noted the timestamp. The prophet had the story by 3. Harry was in the library when Hermione dropped a freshly appeared edition on his open textbook. Harry Potter files provisional lordship claim, Gringotts certifies 16 ancient houses. Below that, Ministry reviewing the situation. Ancient Lord Malfoy declines comment. Chief Warlock confirms awareness of filing. Harry read the article. Skeeter's byline again, naturally. This time she'd had to work with actual documented facts, which seemed to constrain her but hadn't stopped her from framing each fact in the most dramatically possible way. The number 16 was mentioned 4 times in the first 2 paragraphs. There was a sidebar about the history of the 1752 Accords and a separate sidebar about the last time someone had held multiple Wisengamot seats, which had been in 1834 and had apparently ended in what the paper tactfully called significant political restructuring. Harry folded the paper and put it to one side. "You knew this would happen," Hermione said. "Yes," Harry said. "And you're all right with it?" "I'm all right with it," he confirmed. "We needed it to be public before Malfoy could challenge it privately. A challenge looks different when the whole world's already reading the documentation." Hermione sat down across from him. She had her thinking face on, the one that meant she was several steps ahead of the current conversation and waiting politely for it to catch up. "The Wisengamot session is next month. November 15th, Harry said. "We need to prepare," she said. "Not just legally, Augusta's handling the legal architecture. But you need to understand every house in your claim, what their historical positions were, what other families have interests in them, what the current political tensions are around each one." She looked at him steadily. "I've been doing preliminary research since Tuesday." "I know you have," Harry said. "It's quite a lot of reading," she said. "I know that too," he said. "Split it with me." She looked at him with something that was relief dressed as practicality, because Hermione Granger felt things deeply and expressed them in terms of shared work. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes." Draco Malfoy found Harry in the corridor outside the library at 5 o'clock. Not ambushed him, came toward him in a way that suggested deliberate interception but not aggression. He was alone, which was notable. The 2 boys Harry had already learned were his default companions, Crabbe and Goyle, whose primary utility seemed to be their size, were absent. Harry stopped walking. Draco stopped about 5 feet away. They looked at each other. "Your father came to the school this morning," Harry said. "I know," Draco said. "Did he tell you why?" "He told me it was board business," Draco said. His voice had a stiffness to it that wasn't natural, the sound of someone performing a version of themselves rather than being it. "Do you believe that?" Harry asked. A pause. Draco's jaw was tight. "What I believe doesn't enter into it." "It could," Harry said. Draco looked at him. The expression was complicated. Contempt was the top layer, the performed one, the one his father had probably spent years cultivating in him. But under it, something less settled. Something that was working on a problem it didn't have good language for yet. "My father thinks you're going to destroy everything," Draco said. "The old order. The way things work." "Some of the ways things work deserve destroying," Harry said. "He says you don't understand what you're disrupting." "He's right that I don't understand everything," Harry said. "That's different from not having the right to disrupt it." He paused. "Your family has been using those 16 houses' political weight in absentia for years. Proxy votes. Legal interests. All the things an untended heritage lets other people leverage." He didn't say it with heat. Just as fact. "That's been useful to your father." Draco didn't deny it. "That was interesting. So now those things go back to the houses," Harry said. "I'm not after your family, Draco. I'm not trying to ruin anyone specifically. But I'm not going to be a convenient absence anymore." Draco looked at him for a long moment. "He said you'd be reasonable," Draco said slowly. He was planning to make you an offer. I know, Harry said. I told him I was fine. He was. Draco stopped. Started again. He wasn't expecting that. No, Harry said. Another silence. In the corridor around them, students moved through in both directions, flowing past this small still point of a conversation without paying it particular attention. My father doesn't lose, Draco said. It came out less like a statement of fact and more like a question, or an appeal. Everyone loses eventually, Harry said, not unkindly. The interesting part is what they learn from it. He paused. What your father does with this is his choice. What you do with it is yours. Those aren't the same choice. He stepped around Draco and kept walking. Behind him, he heard nothing, no response, no retreating footsteps for a moment. Just the sound of someone standing very still in a corridor, in the middle of a realization they hadn't finished having yet. That evening, in the common room, Harry wrote a letter to Ragnolf about the binding removal, confirming next Saturday, requesting the 7th floor room, asking whether the castle's natural resonance would assist rather than hinder the process. He wrote to Augusta confirming the meeting, thanking her, noting 3 specific legal questions he'd thought of on the walk back that he wanted addressed before the filing was challenged. He wrote a short second note to the Gringotts channel for Sirius Black. He didn't know if the first letter had arrived. He didn't know if there was anyone intact enough to read it. He wrote anyway. The filing went through today. You officially have an heir presumptive with legal standing, which means your situation is no longer something that can be ignored procedurally. Mrs. Augusta Longbottom is beginning the trial petition. She has never lost a case. I thought you should have something to know, wherever you are. Harry he sealed it. Gave it to the Gringotts owl, which had taken to roosting on the windowsill above his dormitory bed with the proprietary air of something that had decided it lived here now. It took the letter and was gone in 3 wing beats into the October dark. Ron looked up from his exploding snap game with Dean and Seamus. Another one? Yeah, Harry said. Is this going to be a regular thing? Ron said. Official-looking owls at all hours. Probably, Harry said. Ron considered this. Then, my mum's going to have thoughts. She reads the Prophet obsessively. What kind of thoughts? Ron squinted thoughtfully. The concerned kind. She worries about people. A pause. She already worried about you before any of this, actually. She saw you on the platform and he stopped, as if recalibrating how much to say. She made sure you knew about the barrier. She was watching out for you. Before it was, big. Harry was quiet for a moment. Tell her thank you, he said finally. You could tell her yourself, Ron said. She'll write to you. She will absolutely write to you. This is exactly the kind of situation she can't not. The owl was back at the window. A different owl, school owl, the standard variety, a reply too fast to be from Gringotts. Harry took the note. It was from Sirius Black. One line, in handwriting that shook at the edges but was legible and clear, tell me your plan. Harry looked at it for a long time. Outside, the castle breathed. The fire crackled. Ron asked what it was and Harry held it up so he could read it and Ron read it and then looked at Harry with an expression somewhere between exhilarated and slightly terrified. Harry picked up his quill. Here's the plan, he wrote, and began. Chapter 4, A Name in Chains. The binding removal happened on a Saturday. Harry had spent the week before it in a state of functional calm that was doing a reasonable job of concealing something that wasn't quite nervousness, more like the particular alertness of a person standing at the edge of a high place, not afraid of falling, just very aware of the drop. Ragnolf had been precise in his briefing. The process would take 3 to 5 hours, the counter-sequences would be applied in order from outermost binding to deepest, and there would be a period midway through where Harry's core would be in a transitional state, partially bound, partially free. That was the most medically delicate phase of the whole procedure. Transitional in what sense? Pomfrey had asked, at the planning meeting Ragnolf had held on Wednesday in the hospital wing. In the sense that we're removing a set of structural constraints that have existed for as long as the core has been developing, Ragnolf had said. The core learned to grow within those constraints. When we remove them, it will need to adjust. Expand into the space it was never allowed to occupy. He'd paused. The physical experience may be uncomfortable. Define uncomfortable, Harry had said. I would rather not set expectations, Ragnolf had said, which was, Harry thought, about as clarifying as anything could be. Pomfrey had prepared the room of requirement on Friday evening, accompanied by a second Gringotts healer Harry hadn't met, a quiet woman named Sorka, who worked in core stabilization and who looked at Harry with the focused, professional attention of someone very good at a very specific job. The room had given them what they needed without being asked: a flat, clear stone floor, chalk-white walls with no windows, a narrow bed along one wall, ambient lighting that didn't flicker, and a faint warmth that had nothing to do with fire. Harry had stood in the doorway and felt the room around him like a held breath. Augusta Longbottom came up from London on Friday night and stayed at the Hogsmeade Inn, which Harry only knew because Neville mentioned it at dinner with the slightly dazed expression of a boy who'd received 3 separate owls from his grandmother in one day, 2 of which contained legal questions and 1 of which contained a recipe for a restorative soup she apparently felt Harry needed to consume before proceeding. Harry did not consume the soup. He ate a normal breakfast on Saturday morning, told Ron he'd see him later, and went to the 7th floor with Hermione on one side and Neville on the other, neither of whom he'd asked to come and both of whom had simply appeared outside the dormitory at 8 in the morning with expressions that communicated they had done a risk assessment and concluded they were coming regardless. He hadn't told them not to. Ragnolf was already in the room when they arrived. So was Sorka, checking her equipment with the systematic focus of someone running a pre-procedure checklist. Pomfrey was laying things out on a folded cloth with the orderly precision of a woman who had been ensuring people survived alarming situations for 30 years and found that organization helped. Augusta Longbottom was standing near the far wall in her good robes with the Gringotts certification documents in her hands, there as the official legal witness, her presence making the whole thing formally recorded for purposes Harry had requested. Dumbledore was not there. Harry had not invited him. He'd half expected the headmaster to arrive anyway, but either Dumbledore had genuinely respected the boundary or he'd decided that the strategic value of respecting it outweighed the value of being present. Harry wasn't sure which, and for now it didn't matter. "Mr. Potter," Ragnolf said. "Are you ready?" Harry looked around the room. Hermione was standing near the door with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, maintaining a composed expression that her knuckles contradicted. Neville was beside her, quiet and still, that particular steady quality he had, the one that had been there since the first night on the boats. "Yes," Harry said. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Walk me through it as we go. Don't manage what I hear." Ragnolf nodded. "Of course." Harry lay back. The ceiling was plain white and the lighting was even and warm, and he stared up at it while Ragnolf began speaking in the low, rapid syllables of the counter-sequence. It wasn't any language Harry recognized, older than Latin, older than anything his reading this week had covered, something that felt like it belonged to the same era as the castle's foundations. The words had texture. Wait. They sat in the room's air differently from ordinary speech. He felt the first counter-sequence hit the outermost binding like a key turning in a lock. The sensation was immediate. A release in his chest, sudden and clean, like taking a breath after being held just slightly underwater for so long that he'd stopped noticing the pressure. The light in his hands surged for a moment, bright enough that everyone in the room registered it, and then steadied at a new baseline that was visibly, noticeably higher than before. "First layer," Ragnolf said, without pausing in the sequence. "The external suppressor. It was designed to prevent accidental magical expression. Anything above a low ambient threshold was being captured and dispersed before it could manifest." A beat. "How do you feel?" "Better," Harry said, and that was technically accurate but completely inadequate. The second layer took longer. Ragnolf's voice found a different cadence, slower and more deliberate, and Sorka moved closer, her wand tracking something Harry couldn't see above his sternum. This binding went deeper, he could feel the difference in the quality of its resistance, older somehow, more thoroughly integrated into the channels it was suppressing. When it broke, Harry gripped the edge of the bed. Not in pain, more like the feeling of a limb you'd kept perfectly still for hours suddenly being released, the flood of sensation that was almost too much and entirely necessary. He breathed through it. The room had gotten warmer. The ambient light he'd been radiating had climbed again, and Sorka said something in a sharp undertone to Ragnolf that Harry caught, faster than expected. "Core is, yes, I see it," and Pomfrey was at his other side with 2 fingers at his pulse point and a calm expression that was doing excellent work. "Second layer," Ragnolf said. "The lineage suppressor." This was specifically targeting the ancestral connections, the inheritance channels that the house's magic uses to recognize an heir. He paused. "This one was placed when you were 4. The magic is more recent." "I know," Harry said. "Do you feel the difference?" Harry took stock. The lineage connections were, he could feel them now, where before they'd been absent, 16 of them, like threads attached somewhere further back than he could see, vibrating faintly with the same quality as the castle's resonance but older and stranger and distinctly multiple. Not overwhelming. Present. "Yes," he said. 16. "I can feel them." Sorka looked at Ragnolf with an expression that was professionally contained and personally startled. "He shouldn't be able to feel them individually at this stage," she said, quietly. "No," Ragnolf agreed. "He shouldn't." Harry filed that information and didn't pursue it because they had 3 more layers to go and this wasn't the time. The 3rd layer was the one Ragnolf had warned him about. The transitional phase. Outermost 2 gone, deepest 3 remaining, the core in a state between its 2 configurations, expanding into the newly available space while still partially constrained. Ragnolf had described it as uncomfortable, which Harry now understood had been a significant understatement. It wasn't pain precisely. It was the sensation of something that had been compressed for a decade suddenly being given room, and the room was enormous, and the expansion was not gentle. It moved outward from his core like pressure in all directions simultaneously, and the light coming off him had stopped being a faint luminescence and was now something that lit the far corners of the room, and Hermione had made a sound and Neville said something sharp and low that Harry didn't catch. He kept his eyes on the ceiling and breathed. "Harry," Pomfrey said. "Tell me what you're experiencing." "It's fine," he said, through his teeth. "That is not what I asked," she said, in a tone that brooked nothing. "It's pressure. Expansion. It isn't painful, it's just," he searched, loud. "Like everything's turning up at once." He breathed out. "I'm all right. Keep going." Ragnolf kept going. The 4th layer took 40 minutes. It was the one placed at 7, the most recent, and it had been designed differently from the others, not just suppressive but redirective, taking the magic it captured and channeling it somewhere else rather than simply dispersing it. Where that somewhere else was, Ragnolf said, he'd need more time to trace. It released with a sensation Harry had no good metaphor for, like a door he'd been pressing against his whole life suddenly swinging open, and he was on the other side, and the space on the other side was not a room. It was everything. And then the 5th layer. The deepest. Ragnolf's voice slowed to something that was almost a chant, and Sorka had both hands now in a specific pattern over Harry's core, and Pomfrey was simply watching with her full professional attention, and in the doorway Harry was dimly aware that Hermione had stopped pretending to be calm and Neville was standing with both hands braced on either side of the door frame as if anchoring himself. The 5th binding was the first one. The one placed at 15 months old. The foundational layer, the original act of suppression, the thing that had set the template for everything that came after it. It had 11 years of roots. Harry felt it go. The light in the room went white. Not briefly. For several seconds, long enough for Ragnolf to finish the counter-sequence and lower his wand, long enough for Sorka to exhale slowly and step back, long enough for Pomfrey to say Harry in a voice that was trying to be steady and mostly succeeding. The white faded, slowly, like eyes adjusting after a flash, and what it left behind was the room looking exactly as it had before, plain and white and warm, and Harry lying on the bed with his hands at his sides. He stared at the ceiling. He was himself. That was the strange part, that he'd expected to feel different and instead he just felt entirely, completely like himself, but like the version of himself that had always been underneath the version he'd been living as. Like a signature that had been written small and cramped for 11 years and had just been given a full page. "Harry," Pomfrey said. "Still here," he said. "Yes," she said. "Extraordinarily so." He sat up. The room was solid around him. The castle was, everywhere. Not like Monday in the Great Hall, not the overwhelming roar of a recognition he couldn't withstand. More like standing in a conversation. Back and forth. Mutual. He looked at his hands. No faint light. No shimmer. Just his hands, ordinary looking, slightly too thin, the bitten nails. And underneath the skin, through the skin, in some way that was visible if you knew what to look for, something that had nothing to do with glow or shimmer or anything that dramatic. Just a quality. A presence. He was radiating magic the way a fire radiates heat, constantly, effortlessly, without trying. Sorka was looking at her diagnostic instruments with an expression he couldn't read. "Ragnolf," she said quietly. "Yes," Ragnolf said, also looking at the instruments. "What does it say?" Harry asked. Ragnolf looked at him directly. Ragnolf was, Harry had come to understand, a man who gave clean facts as a form of respect, and he lived up to it now. "The standard classification runs to Category 7, Ragnolf said. Category 7 is defined as once-in-a-generation talent, Merlin-class potential. The instrument we used to measure was calibrated to Category 7 as its upper limit." He paused. "It has gone past its upper limit." "How far past?" Harry said. "We don't know," Sorka said. "The instrument doesn't have a range beyond Category 7. It's reading you and declining to give a number." The room held that for a moment. Then Augusta Longbottom, who had stood against the far wall through the entire procedure with perfect composure, said, in a voice like someone laying the final piece of an argument, documented exactly that way. "Instrument exceeded. Above classification. Witnessed by 2 Gringotts healers, the school matron, and a certified magical inheritance advocate." She looked at Harry. "How do you feel?" "Like myself," Harry said. "Like I haven't felt like myself in a very long time and now I do." She nodded once, as if that was the correct answer. "Good. Now. You have Wisengamot preparation to be getting on with." He spent the afternoon outside. He hadn't planned to, there was preparation to do, reading to review, the legal documents Augusta had sent him from London that Hermione had sorted into priority order with annotation notes. But when he walked out of the 7th floor corridor and down to the entrance hall, the castle was so present around him, so genuinely alive to him now in a way that wasn't intrusive but was unmistakable, that he kept walking until he was out the front doors and on the grounds. The October air hit him. Cold and clean, with the smell of the lake and the grass and the particular mineral quality of the Scottish Highlands. He walked without destination, past the edge of the formal grounds, down toward the lake, and he sat on the bank in the thin afternoon light and looked at the water. He could feel every building behind him. Every corridor. Every room. The magic woven through the castle's stone, centuries of it, layered and alive, and at the center of that web, for specific signatures, older than the rest, the founding magic of Gryffindor and Slytherin and Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, and they were his. Not because he'd taken them. Because he was the convergence point of 4 different bloodlines that had been slowly, patiently moving toward each other for 500 years. He thought about Hermione's note from the library, "The compact shall lie dormant until such time as a natural heir of sufficient standing arrives." He thought about the castle trying to wake him up on Monday. He thought about the portrait on the 6th floor that had been following his movements through the castle all week, a very old portrait, mostly blackened with age, of a figure in robes so old they predated the current style by several centuries, who had said absolutely nothing on Monday, nothing on Tuesday, nothing on Wednesday, and had yesterday, as Harry passed at 8 in the morning, said clearly and without preamble, "You look like her." Harry had stopped. "Like who?" "Come back when you've had the removal done," the portrait had said. "Then we'll talk." He needed to go back to that portrait. But first he sat by the lake for a while longer and let the castle breathe around him and felt, for the first time in memory, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Ron found him 20 minutes later, slightly out of breath and carrying 2 jacket potatoes wrapped in a napkin, clearly smuggled from the kitchens. "I heard it went well," Ron said, dropping down beside him on the bank. "Who told you?" "Neville," Ron said. He paused, apparently deciding how to render Neville's account. He said the room lit up like daylight and Pomfrey looked like she was going to faint and the instrument broke. "The instrument didn't break," Harry said. "It just ran out of numbers." Ron handed him a jacket potato. "Same thing, isn't it?" Harry ate the jacket potato. It was extremely good, even cold, and he was hungrier than he'd realized. "There's going to be fallout," Harry said. "More than what's already falling." "The Wisengamot session is 3 weeks away," Harry said. "Augusta filed the Black trial petition yesterday through the alternative legal channel, the one that bypasses Dumbledore's scheduling authority. It'll be formally received on Monday. By Tuesday the Prophet will have it." He looked at the lake. "People are going to accelerate. Whatever they were planning to try before the session, the petition will make them move faster." "Like Malfoy," Ron said. "Like everyone who doesn't want this to go through," Harry said. "The trial's a problem for a lot of people, not just the ones who want Sirius locked up. A successful trial petition filed by an 11-year-old who bypassed the chief warlock is going to make the whole system look fragile." "Is it fragile?" Ron asked. "Yes," Harry said simply. "It's been fragile for years. It just needed someone to stop treating it carefully." Ron was quiet for a moment, eating his own potato and looking at the lake, where the giant squid was making its evening rounds along the near bank. "My dad's a ministry man," Ron said eventually. "He works in misuse of Muggle artifacts. He loves it, the ministry, he loves what it's supposed to be. He's just perpetually disappointed by what it actually is." He picked at the potato. "He's going to have complicated feelings about all of this." "And your mum?" Harry asked, remembering Ron's comment from last week. "Mum already wrote to me," Ron said. "She said," he pulled a crumpled letter from his pocket, smoothed it, "she said, tell Harry Potter he is welcome at the Burrow for Christmas if he has nowhere better to be, and that I intend to fatten him up considerably because the photographs in the paper make him look like a strong wind could end him, which is unacceptable." Harry stared at the letter. Then at Ron. "She's never met me," Harry said. "She knew your parents," Ron said. "Bit. My parents were in the Order of the Phoenix with them." He folded the letter. "She's been thinking about you since she saw you on the platform. She does this, she adopts people. It's actually impossible to stop." Harry looked at the lake. The squid dipped below the surface, leaving a ring of ripples that widened and eventually became invisible. He thought about the Dursleys' kitchen, which was always warm in the mornings because Aunt Petunia started cooking early, warmth that had never been for him. He thought about the space between someone else's belonging and having belonging of his own. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "For Christmas. I'd like that." "Good," Ron said. "I'll tell her. She'll probably send another 17 letters, just so you know." "I can handle 17 letters," Harry said. "And a food parcel." "Especially a food parcel," Harry said, and Ron laughed and Harry did too, there on the bank of the Black Lake with the mountains going dark at their edges and the castle warm and aware behind them, and for a while the weight of 16 houses and an upcoming Wisengamot session and a man in Azkaban and a legal challenge being prepared somewhere in a Malfoy study was just background noise. He found the portrait at 8:15. Sixth floor corridor, east wing, a stretch of wall between a window and a suit of armor that got almost no foot traffic. The portrait was larger than he'd remembered, maybe 3 feet tall, dark-framed, the paint so old it was more texture than image in some places. The figure in it was a woman, he thought, or had been when the paint was fresh enough to tell. Robes that predated modern wizarding fashion by a significant margin. Dark hair. She was looking at him when he arrived. "You had it done," she said. "Not a question." "This afternoon," Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment with the intensity of a painted face that had waited a very long time for something and was now determining whether the wait had been worthwhile. "You look like her more now," she said. "Your eyes are his. But the rest," she paused. "The way you stand." "Who?" Harry asked. He'd asked on Thursday and she hadn't answered. He asked again without impatience. She'd waited however many centuries. He could wait another minute. "Igraine," she said. Harry searched his reading. "Arthurian. Pendragon. Arthur's mother." "My cousin," the portrait said. "3 times removed, but we were close. The magical lines were always cleaner in our branch." A pause. "I am Morgause." Harry went through what he knew about Morgause, which was limited to the broad strokes of legends he'd read as a child because the Dursleys had a copy of Mallory that he'd read in self-defense against boredom. Half-sister to Morgan Le Fay. Both of them daughters of Gorlois and Igraine. Both of them, in the stories, eventually set against Arthur. "I'm heir to House Le Fay," Harry said. "Morgan was your sister." "Half-sister," the portrait said. "She would correct you on that herself, given the chance. She corrected everyone on everything, given the chance." Something that might have been fondness in the painted voice. "She was also the greatest natural magical talent anyone in our family had ever encountered, and our family had encountered several notable ones." The painted eyes studied him. "Until now." Harry leaned against the wall beside the portrait's frame and looked at her. "You wanted to talk to me after the removal. What did you want to say?" "There's a vault," she said. "Beneath the castle. Not a Hogwarts vault, older than the school. It was sealed when the founders built, and they built around it deliberately. They knew it was there. Godric," she said the name with the familiarity of someone who'd known the man. "Godric was very thorough about incorporating it into the castle's foundations rather than disturbing it, because even he couldn't open it and he was too proud to ask Morgan for help." "What's in the vault?" "Records," she said. "Personal records of House Peveril, House Le Fay, House Emrys, House Pendragon. The original documents. Letters. Histories that didn't survive in any other form." She paused. "And one other thing. A Peveril inheritance item." Harry stood very still. "The Peverils," he said slowly. "3 brothers," she said. "You've read the story, I imagine. Every magical child reads it at some point, even if they think it's just a story." She looked at him steadily. "It isn't just a story." "The Deathly Hallows," Harry said. The pieces had been assembling themselves slowly, in the background, since he'd first seen the name on the scroll. 3 objects. 3 brothers. And he was heir to Peveril, which meant, 2 of them are lost, Morgause said. "One of them is in that vault. It has been waiting, as the castle has been waiting, as I have been waiting." She paused. "You understand what I'm telling you?" "I need to see inside that vault," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "The entrance is on the ground floor. The east corridor, the one that's been sealed since before anyone currently in this castle was born. You'll know the door when the castle shows it to you." "When will it show it to me?" It already is, she said. You're not paying attention. Harry looked at the corridor around him. The stone walls. The window to his left showing the dark grounds. The suit of armor, standing as it had always stood, holding its polearm at a standard angle. He looked again. The suit of armor's polearm was positioned at a specific angle that, if you traced it as a line, pointed along the corridor, and at the end of the corridor the torchlight fell differently on one particular section of wall than it fell on the others, the stone there slightly paler, the mortar lines in a slightly different pattern, and in the center of that section, a door, not hidden exactly, just unremarkable, just a door he hadn't noticed because he hadn't been looking. Oh, he said. Good night, Harry Potter, Morgause said, with the manner of someone who had done their part. He went to get Hermione. Not because he couldn't go alone, the castle would let him in, he was certain of that, but because Hermione would not forgive him if he went into a pre-Hogwarts vault containing records from 4 of the oldest magical houses in Britain and didn't bring her. She was in the common room, where she'd been since he'd left, surrounded by Augusta's documents and cross-reference notes, with ink on 3 fingers and the particular focused expression of someone doing something they found genuinely satisfying. When Harry came through the portrait hole and said there's a vault, she had her notes rolled up and her wand in hand before he finished the sentence. They went down together through the castle's night corridors. Hogwarts after hours was a different place, quieter and somehow larger, the corridors longer, the shadows with more texture. Harry moved without hesitation. The castle was guiding him, not intrusively, just, making the route obvious. A staircase that didn't move tonight. A corridor that ended where he expected it to. The east wing on the ground floor. The door was unmistakable now. It was set into the wall at the end of a corridor Harry had walked past 3 times this week and not noticed, and it was unremarkable in every way, plain wood, iron handle, no visible lock, and it was also, if you felt for it, warm. A warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Hermione looked at it. This isn't Hogwarts-era construction, she said. The stonework around the frame is, she put her hand near the edge of the frame, it's older. Much older. Pre-founders, Harry said. She looked at him. He nodded toward the door. He touched the handle. The door opened. Inside, a staircase going down, lit by torches that came to life as they descended, revealing themselves as they went. Not a long staircase, 2 floors at most, maybe less. It opened into a room that was not large but was high-ceilinged, the walls lined with shelving carved directly into the stone, and on those shelves, protected under preservation spells that Harry could feel humming like sustained notes, were documents. Hundreds of them. Rolled, folded, stacked. Some in cases of material he didn't recognize, some loose, some bound in covers that had survived because of magic rather than material. And in the center of the room, on a stone plinth, a wooden box sealed with a lock that responded to Harry's hand before he touched it, the lock simply opened, the seal dissolving, the box recognizing what it had been waiting for. Inside the box, a ring. Not a ring, actually. The ring. The resurrection stone, set in a Peveril signet ring, in a metal that wasn't gold and wasn't silver and had no name he knew. Old beyond any reasonable definition of old. Hermione had both hands over her mouth. Harry, she said, very quietly. I know, he said. I know. You're not going to, she looked at him, are you going to use it? He looked at the ring. He thought about his parents, whom he'd never known, whose faces he'd seen only in photographs, who had died for him when he was 15 months old. He thought about how easy it would be to put the ring on and turn the stone and, he closed the box. No, he said. Not now. Maybe not ever. He looked at her steadily. The dead should stay dead, Hermione. I'm not going to, he paused, choosing carefully, I'm not going to use grief as a weapon, even against myself. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was complicated and warm and a little heartbroken around the edges. Then she nodded, once. The records, she said, because she was Hermione Granger and the most constructive thing she knew to do with big feelings was direct them at big problems. Yes, he said. They spent 2 hours in that room. Hermione worked with the focused reverence of someone given access to a primary source library that had been sealed for 600 years. Harry moved more slowly, reading selectively, looking for specific things. He found House Peverell's genealogical records, which extended further back than any magical genealogy he'd seen, annotated in a hand that was probably Ignotus Peverell's own, tracing the line through centuries of marriages and descendants. He found House Le Fay's personal correspondence, Morgan's own letters, dozens of them, in a handwriting that was sharp and fast and expressed things Harry suspected the stories had been very careful to bury. And at the back of the bottom shelf, in a case with a Le Fay seal on it, he found a document that was neither genealogy nor correspondence. It was a theoretical text, dense and technical, in Latin that he could only partially parse, and from the sections he could read it was about prophecy, specifically about the structure and limitations of prophecies, about how they could be manipulated, about the gap between a prophecy as a genuine precognitive event and a prophecy as a self-fulfilling narrative constructed by interested parties. He read what he could and made note of what he couldn't, and he didn't say anything about it to Hermione. Not because he was keeping it from her, he'd tell her. But he needed to understand it himself first. They went back upstairs at 11, through the sleeping castle, and Harry walked Hermione to the fat lady's portrait and she went through first and then looked back at him from the other side. "Harry," she said. "The vault. The records. The ring." She held his gaze. "This is going to matter. Everything in that room is going to matter." "I know," he said. "Are you scared?" He thought about the clean, honest answer. "No," he said. "Not of any of it. What I did in there, closing the box, not," he gestured, "that was the first time I've ever done something like that. Said no to something I actually wanted because it wasn't right." A pause. It felt good. Being that kind of person. She looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone cataloging a thing they want to remember exactly. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. Monday morning. The petition reached the DMLE at 9:15. Harry knew because Augusta sent him a 2-word note, "It's done." He was in history of magic at the time, which was taught by a ghost named Professor Binns who had apparently died while teaching and simply continued, and which was universally considered the most soporific class in the school. Harry spent the lesson constructing, in the margin of his parchment, a clean organizational structure for everything that needed to happen before November 15th. Hermione, who had been staring at Binns with the expression of someone determined to extract educational value from the situation regardless of the obstacle, leaned over after 20 minutes and looked at his margin notes. Then she picked up her quill and added 3 items to the list. He added 2 more. She crossed one out and wrote a better version. He circled something and drew an arrow to a different section. By the time the class ended, they had a working plan that covered legal, political, and informational priorities for the next 3 weeks, written in their combined handwriting in the margin of a history of magic parchment around Hermione's notes about the 1709 Warlocks Convention. Tuesday. The Prophet. Black trial petition filed, source, anonymous Lord, Wisingamot Charter S.12 SS.4. Not Harry's name in the headline. Augusta had advised that. The legal channel used was one that allowed the petitioner's name to be withheld in the initial filing, and given that they expected a legal challenge, better not to put Harry's name on the petition until it was already past the point where it could be procedurally blocked. The name would come out, it always did, but giving it a few days meant the petition would be officially received and logged before anyone could argue it shouldn't be. The story was by Skeeter again, and it was furious in a way that Harry found entertaining. She clearly had a source inside the DMLE who had given her the broad strokes but not the details, and you could see the frustration bleeding through her prose, the uncharacteristic hedging on specifics, the reliance on phrases like "it is believed" and "sources suggest." She knew it was Harry. She didn't have confirmation. Not yet. Draco Malfoy cornered Harry in the corridor between herbology and lunch. Another alone interception, no Crabbe, no Goyle. He was developing a pattern, and Harry was beginning to understand what the pattern meant. The petition, Draco said. What about it? Harry said. My father knows it's you. Your father can know whatever he likes, Harry said. Knowing doesn't stop it. He says there are things you don't understand, Draco said. About Black. About what he did. Then your father should present them at a trial, Harry said. Under oath, with a pensieve, in front of a full Wizengamot. That's what trials are for. Draco's jaw tightened. My father doesn't, he stopped. Doesn't what? Harry said, genuinely curious. He doesn't like things he can't control, Draco said. It came out quietly, like something that had been sitting unexamined and had just been examined. Harry looked at him. I know, he said. I've met him. Draco looked at the floor. Then at Harry. The performed contempt was mostly gone today. Harry wondered whether Malfoy Sr.'s visit had disturbed something in the careful architecture Draco usually maintained, some load-bearing belief that was under new stress. What do you want from the Wizengamot? Draco asked. Actually. Not the legal language. Harry considered the question honestly. I want it to work, he said. I want it to be a system that actually does what it's supposed to do, represent magical Britain, adjudicate disputes, protect people under the law. All people. A pause. I don't want to run it. I want it to not need someone like me to come along and force it to function. Draco looked at him with an expression that was trying not to be conflicted about this and failing. That's not, he stopped. Not what? Harry said. Not what I expected you to say, Draco said. What did you expect? Power, Draco said. You have 16 seats. Anyone else in your position would be thinking about how to leverage that. I'm thinking about how to leverage it, Harry said. For the things I just said. He paused. That is power, Draco. Used well, it looks boring. The theatrical versions, the ones that look impressive from the outside, those are usually the ones that aren't doing anything useful. Draco stared at him. Think about it, Harry said, and walked to lunch. The letter from Sirius arrived on Wednesday. Not one line this time. 4 pages, in the handwriting that still shook at the edges but had gained something in the 2 weeks since the first note, a quality of solidity, as if having someone to write to had given the word somewhere to go. The handwriting got steadier as the pages went on. He wrote about the night Harry's parents died. He wrote it plainly, not with the defensive urgency of someone making a case for themselves, but with the specific, grief-stained clarity of someone who had replayed it too many times to dress it up. The secret keeper switch, he and James had changed it at the last minute, deciding that Sirius as the obvious choice was too dangerous, choosing instead someone no one would suspect. Peter Pettigrew. Who Sirius had gone to find, after, who had blown up the street and faked his own death and left Sirius to be found at the scene with a wand that had been used in the explosion and no story that would have been believed if he'd told it. Which he hadn't tried to tell. Because they hadn't given him the chance to try. He described Azkaban. Not at length, and not dramatically. Just enough that Harry understood what 10 years of Dementors did, and why the handwriting shook, and what it cost the man to write steadily by the end. And at the very end, in smaller letters that looked like they'd been added after the rest, your father would have been furious about the bindings. He would have dismantled the whole ministry with his bare hands if he thought anyone had touched you. I knew him better than I've known anything. He would have been, a word crossed out, I keep stopping because I don't know how to say this right. You're 11 and you're doing things James and Lily spent years trying to do and didn't live to finish, and I don't know whether to be terrified for you or, they would have been so proud. They would have been so proud of you. Harry read the letter twice. Then he put it in the locked box under his bed, the same box he'd put the Gringotts documents in on the first night, which he'd reinforced with a locking charm that Hermione had taught him and which he was reasonably confident in. He sat on the edge of his bed for a while. Ron was asleep across the dormitory. The room was dark and quiet, with the usual sounds of a sleeping school around it. Harry sat with his hands on his knees and the letter under the floor, and he breathed slowly, in and out, and let himself feel what the letter had put in him. It was grief, but a different kind than he'd expected. Not for parents he'd never known in any complete way, that was its own older, quieter grief, the kind that had been with him since he'd understood enough to understand it. This was something more immediate. The grief of finding out that someone had been waiting for him to show up, alone and in the dark, and that he'd gotten there, and it had taken 11 years and the collapse of an entire suppression architecture, but he'd gotten there. He got up. He sat at his desk. He wrote back. He told Sirius about the vault. About Morgause. About the ring he'd closed in the box and why. He told him about Augusta's preparation, about the legal structure, about what November 15th was going to look like. He told him about Dumbledore and the 3 denied petitions, and he told him without editorial comment because Sirius deserved the information and could form his own view of it. He told him about the castle. How it felt. How it had been feeling since Monday. And at the end he wrote, "I've been thinking about what you said, about my father being furious. I think about what they were like a lot, what it would have been like to know them. I don't have grief for them the way I probably should. I think because I never had them to lose, exactly. But I have this. Everything they built and everything they were is in the houses and the magic and in you writing to me. That feels like something. November 15th. I'm going to get you a trial. And if it comes out the way I think it's going to come out, you'll be free. I'd like to meet you. Properly." Harry he sealed it. He left it on the desk for the Gringotts owl in the morning, and he went to bed, and this time he didn't fall asleep at the desk but in the bed, properly, and he slept without dreaming, and the castle breathed around him all through the long night. Chapter 5, The Sorting That Mattered. 3 things happened on the same Thursday morning, 2 weeks before November 15th. The first was that Lucius Malfoy filed a formal legal challenge to Harry's provisional lordship claim through the Ministry's Magical Inheritance Review Tribunal, arguing that the Gringotts' active inheritance certification was procedurally irregular and required independent ministry verification before it could be considered valid. The second was that a sealed room on the 4th floor opened itself for the first time in recorded Hogwarts history, revealing an interior that smelled like ozone and old starlight and contained, according to Phileas Flitwick who was the first faculty member inside, walls covered floor to ceiling in runic inscription in 4 distinct scripts simultaneously, Futhark, Ogham, Greek, and something that predated all 3. The third was that Harry woke up at 5 in the morning with the absolute, bone-certain knowledge that something in the castle wanted him to go somewhere specific right now, and that it was not going to stop wanting this until he went. He lay in bed for 90 seconds debating whether to take this seriously. Then he got up, pulled on his robes, and went. The castle guided him the way it had been guiding him all term, not with anything as obvious as moving walls or animated arrows, just with the quality of this way feeling more right than that way, the same instinct that had become as natural to him as breathing since the binding removal. He went down from Gryffindor Tower, through the 3rd floor, down to the 2nd, and then along a corridor he'd walked before but which tonight felt different, the torches burning slightly brighter on one side, the shadows arranging themselves like pointing fingers. He came to a portrait he'd never paid attention to. It was not like Morgause's portrait. That one was old and dark and half illegible. This one was clear, restored, or perhaps just preserved with unusual care. A man, painted with the precision of someone who'd sat for it themselves rather than being depicted from memory, seated in a high-backed chair with the relaxed posture of someone for whom authority was comfortable rather than performed. Dark red hair, graying at the temple. Eyes that were painted with the particular technique that made them seem to track movement. Godric Gryffindor looked at Harry the way you looked at someone you recognized. "I wondered when you'd find me," he said. His voice was larger than a portrait's voice should be. More present. The preservation on this portrait was extraordinary, Harry realized. Whoever had painted it had put something additional into the work. Harry sat down on the floor in front of it because standing felt wrong, felt too formal for what was clearly a conversation that had been waiting a long time to be had. "Hello," Harry said. "You've been in the vault," Gryffindor said. It wasn't a question. "I felt it when you opened it." "You can feel things through your portrait," Harry said. "This portrait, yes. I was involved in its creation in a way that your current understanding of portrait making probably doesn't account for." He looked at Harry with those tracking eyes. "How much did you read?" "Most of the genealogical records. Some of Morgan's correspondence." Harry paused. "I found the theoretical text. On prophecy." Gryffindor was quiet for a moment. "Morgan's text. I could only read parts of it. The Latin was dense." "She wrote it that way deliberately," Gryffindor said. "She didn't want it read by people who weren't prepared for it." A pause. "What did you understand of the parts you could read?" "That prophecy isn't fixed," Harry said slowly. He'd been sitting with this since the vault, turning it over. That a prophecy as an event is different from a prophecy as a weapon. That the gap between what a seer actually sees and what a prophecy means in practice is large enough to drive significant manipulation through. "Go on," Gryffindor said. "And that a prophecy's power comes partly from being believed," Harry said. "That a prophecy about a person shapes that person partly by being told to them. That knowing a prophecy about yourself it changes what you do. Which changes what happens. Which either fulfills or creates the prophecy." He met the painted eyes. "It's a loop. The prophecy creates the outcome partly by existing." "Yes," Gryffindor said. "There's a prophecy about me," Harry said. It wasn't a question either. "There is," Gryffindor said. "Has Dumbledore told you about it?" "No," Harry said. "Will he?" "Eventually," Harry said. "When he thinks I need to know, which may or may not be when I actually need to know." A pause. "Do you know what it says?" "I know what it says," Gryffindor said. "I know what Salazar saw when he looked at the same probable future that the seer eventually encoded, which is not identical. I know what Morgan believed prophecies of this type should be understood as." He folded his painted hands. "What I am not going to do is tell you the specific wording." Harry looked at him. "Because Morgan was right," Gryffindor said, "and if I tell you the specific wording it becomes a constraint. You've spent 11 years in constraints. I'd rather give you the principle and let you navigate by it than give you the map and have you follow it somewhere you don't need to go." "That's going to be frustrating," Harry said. "Yes," Gryffindor said. "Wisdom frequently is." Harry was quiet for a moment. The corridor was still and dark around him except for the portrait's warm glow. "What's the principle?" he said. "The prophecy describes what can happen if you are the person it describes," Gryffindor said. "It is not a command. It is not a sentence. It is a description of a possible person and what that possible person might do." He looked at Harry steadily. "The question is not whether you are that person. The question is what kind of person you choose to be, and whether that person happens to match the description." "And if they do?" Harry said. "Then the prophecy was accurate," Gryffindor said simply. "And you'll have done what needed doing because you chose to, not because something told you to." Harry sat with that. "Voldemort," he said. "Yes," Gryffindor said. "He's not gone," Harry said. It wasn't a question. He'd felt this too, in the way he felt things through the castle, a specific quality of wrongness somewhere in the world that the castle's wards registered like an infection site. "He's diminished but he's still present," Gryffindor confirmed. "The castle knows. Has known since the term began. Something is in the school that shouldn't be." Harry looked at him sharply. "I don't know its form," Gryffindor said, before Harry could ask. "I know it's here. The castle's defenses recognize it in the way they would recognize a splinter, something small and wrong and foreign. Not powerful enough to threaten the castle. But present." He looked at Harry steadily. "You need to find it. How? Harry said. It's a castle with 142 staircases and rooms. I haven't. How do I find one specific wrongness in all of that? You've been walking the whole castle in your awareness since the binding removal, Gryffindor said. You just haven't been looking for anything specific. Look. Harry closed his eyes. He extended the sense he'd been developing all term, the one that read the castle the way reading a room worked, taking in everything without actively processing any of it. He let it spread, floor by floor, corridor by corridor, the worn familiar signatures of hundreds of students and staff and the castle's own deep magic and the wards humming in the foundations and the 4 founders' signatures woven through everything, there. 3rd floor corridor. A specific point, not large, not impressive. A cold spot where the magic felt wrong. Not absent, present and wrong. Something that had learned to imitate being part of the castle's magical environment and was doing it reasonably well but not perfectly. He opened his eyes. 3rd floor, he said. The corridor with the locked door. Gryffindor nodded. The right-hand corridor off the main staircase. What's behind that door? Harry said. Currently. Gryffindor said. Fluffy. Harry stared at him. The 3-headed dog belongs to the groundskeeper, Gryffindor said, with the serenity of someone who finds this an entirely reasonable sentence. The door beyond him leads down to a series of protection chambers that Albus constructed over the summer to guard something he retrieved from Vault 713 at Gringotts in May. He emptied a vault in May, Harry said. A Gringotts vault that was subsequently broken into in July by someone working for Voldemort, Gryffindor said. The vault was already empty by then. Whatever was in it is now in the castle. He brought Voldemort's target into the school, Harry said flatly. He believed the school was the safest place, Gryffindor said. He may be right. He certainly made the protection elaborate. But Voldemort's already in the school, Harry said. Whatever form he's in, he's already here. Which means the protection chambers are irrelevant as a long-term strategy, yes, Gryffindor said. The question is what's using Voldemort's remnant as a host. Someone on the castle grounds, or inside it, is providing a body or a connection. Harry thought about this carefully. The wrongness he'd felt was on the 3rd floor. Which meant whatever was hosting Voldemort's remnant was up there regularly. Not hiding in the rooms below the trap door, up here. Walking the corridors. Attending meals. It's a staff member, Harry said. Almost certainly, Gryffindor said. Harry thought about who, and thought about what he'd seen and sensed over 2 months of watching people the way someone who'd grown up in an unsafe house learned to watch people, and one name surfaced naturally without even requiring much deliberation. Quirrell, he said. Gryffindor didn't confirm or deny. But he didn't not confirm either, and his painted expression had the quality of someone watching an argument reach its natural conclusion. He wears a turban, Harry said. I've noticed that he positions himself. He never turns his back on anything. I thought it was nervous habit. He stopped. It's not nervous habit. He stood up from the floor, brushing off his robes. The corridor outside was beginning to show the first gray quality of a very early morning, the sky visible through the end window still mostly dark. His mind was moving in several directions at once and he was letting it, sorting by urgency. I can't tell Dumbledore, he said. Gryffindor looked at him. Not because I don't trust him with this specifically, Harry said, but because if I tell him, he handles it his way, and his way is to manage information and control the situation and make sure I have exactly as much involvement as he decides I should have. He paused. This is in my school. It's in the castle that the castle asked me to look after, essentially. It's my problem. What are you going to do with it? Gryffindor asked. Nothing yet, Harry said. I need to understand the full picture. What's being guarded, what Voldemort wants with it, how Quirrell is operating. He looked at the portrait steadily. Then I'll act. With information, not in response to someone else's crisis management. You sound like Morgan, Gryffindor said, and it was unmistakably a compliment, which from Godric Gryffindor was interesting given what all the stories said about those two. "She sounds like she was right about most things," Harry said. "Night, Godric." "Good morning, Harry," Gryffindor said, and there was something in his voice that had been absent from portraits, in Harry's experience, before now, something warm and genuine and not performed for the benefit of anyone watching. Just present. Harry went back to his dormitory, changed into a different set of robes, and got his charms textbook. He had 30 minutes before breakfast. He used 20 of them writing a careful, specific note to Hermione that outlined what he discovered and what he needed researched, focusing primarily on what had been in Gringotts Vault 713, what was powerful enough to make Voldemort want it, and what the theoretical structure of a soul fragment looked like, how it attached to a host, how it could be removed, and what its limitations were. The note was long. He wrote it in their agreed shorthand, which they developed over the course of September and October as a natural consequence of passing notes constantly, and which by this point was about 40% compressed reference and 60% their own idiosyncratic notation system. He slid it under her door on his way down to breakfast. She came to breakfast with 3 books, which was her standard response to an unexpected research problem, not 1 book, not 5, 3, because 3 meant she'd already triaged and cross-referenced. She sat down, passed him a folded note, and began eating toast with the economy of someone who had more important things to do than taste their food. He read the note. Vault 713, Nicholas Flamel. Philosopher's Stone. Produces elixir of life, extends life indefinitely. Also capable of transmuting metal to gold, which is secondary, the primary value is the immortality application. If Voldemort is diminished/soul split, the stone is the obvious resource, either create enough elixir to restore a physical form or use it as a stepping stone to full resurrection. This is the object in the protection chambers. Regarding soul fragments, yes, this is possible and documented, though extraordinarily dark. Ripping the soul and anchoring fragments to objects or hosts requires killing. The fragment in Quirrell would need Quirrell's willing or unwilling cooperation. If willing, Quirrell is a Death Eater operative. If unwilling, he's a victim. Either way, the fragment can't remain, it will destroy whoever hosts it eventually. The magical parasitism accelerates physical deterioration. Also, I found something you need to know immediately. The theoretical text from Morgan's vault, I know you brought the Latin sections back with you, I saw you copy them. I used an automatic translation charm on the transcription last night. Harry, Morgan's argument about prophecy. She's writing specifically about a prophecy she witnessed being made. She doesn't say what the prophecy is, but she describes the context: a war, a child born in late July, a mark of some kind, a power the Dark Lord doesn't know. She was watching from the future, essentially, not prescience, she was using a form of temporal magical resonance, I'll explain later, and her conclusion was that the prophecy would shape its own fulfillment unless the subject was strong enough to consciously override it. She wrote this around 500 AD. The prophecy she's describing is almost certainly yours. Harry read this 3 times. Hermione was eating her toast across from him with the focused calm of someone who has delivered a significant piece of information and is giving it room to land. Neville, who had been reading herbology notes beside her, looked up at Harry's face and then at Hermione. "Bad note," he said. "Complicated note," Harry said. He folded it and put it in his pocket. Morgan Le Fay wrote a theoretical analysis of my prophecy 1500 years before I was born. Neville absorbed this. "Is that, I don't know yet what it means," Harry said. "But it means she saw something coming and she wrote a guide for whoever it was going to happen to." He paused. "She sealed it in a vault that only I could open." "She was looking out for you," Neville said. "Across 1500 years," Harry said. "Yes." Neville was quiet for a moment with that. Then, "That's actually quite comforting." "In a terrifying way?" "Yes," Harry said. "Exactly. Ron slid into the seat beside Harry with a full plate and the air of someone who had overheard the last 30 seconds and was deciding how to calibrate his response. He went with, "Right. Normal Thursday, then." The fourth-floor room opened itself at 11:15 during break. Harry was outside by the lake when the castle's awareness shifted, a sudden change in the internal pressure, like a lock clicking somewhere deep in the structure. He was on his feet and moving before the feeling had fully resolved. He didn't explain to Ron and Neville that he was going, they just watched him start walking and then followed, which was, he was finding, how things generally worked in their small group by now. He arrived at the fourth-floor corridor at the same time as Flitwick, who must have felt it through the castle's wards in whatever attenuated way the teachers experienced that connection. The door was plain, flush with the wall, or had been, because now it was ajar, and from the gap a faint light was coming, blue-white and steady. Flitwick went through first, Professor quick and professionally cautious. Harry went through immediately after, which Flitwick clearly noted and chose not to comment on. The room was extraordinary, and Harry's relationship to extraordinary had been significantly revised over the past 2 months, so that was saying something. The walls were covered from floor to very high ceiling in continuous runic inscription, not carved but embedded, the runes glowing faintly in that blue-white light, arranged in 4 distinct registers or tracks that ran parallel to each other around all 4 walls without interruption. Harry stood in the center of the room and turned slowly and felt the inscription humming in his bones at a specific frequency that was entirely distinct from the castle's usual ambient resonance. Flitwick was already at the nearest wall, eyes wide, wand not drawn, hands clasped, the body language of an academic encountering something they understand is above their usual scale of reference and are being appropriately cautious about. For scripts, Flitwick said softly. Running simultaneously, the same content, all 4 scripts, this is, he stopped. I recognize the Futhark register. The Greek I can partially parse. The other 2, Ogham, Harry said. And the 4th one is pre-runic Atlantean, approximately 6000 BCE, which is where magical script systems originate before they diverge into the regional traditions. Flitwick turned and looked at him. I've been doing some reading, Harry said. Apparently, Flitwick said. Are you able to read all 4? Not all 4, Harry said honestly. The Atlantean is difficult. The others I can work with. He moved to the nearest wall and looked at the Futhark register at approximately eye level. He read in silence for a moment. It's the Compact, he said. The Founder's Compact. The terms of the magical inheritance, what it means for a natural heir to hold all 4 founder lineages. What comes with it, what's required, what the castle's obligations are and what the heir's obligations are. This room has been sealed since the school was built, Flitwick said. Since before the school was built, Harry said. The vault below this on the ground floor is older. This was here first, the founders built around it. Incorporated it. He was reading further along the wall. The castle's sentience. It's described here, the mechanism. The 4 founders each put a portion of their core into the foundations when they raised the castle. Not just their magic, their awareness. Their judgment. Their perception. He paused at a section. Which is why the castle can make decisions. Open rooms. Choose when to show staircases. Guide people who need guiding. He ran his finger just above the runes without touching them. It's 4 intelligences woven into one. Been running that way for 1,000 years. Flitwick was very still. And you, he said carefully, are heir to all 4 of those contributing intelligences. Which is why it's been talking to me since I got here, Harry said. And why it can, now that the bindings are removed. Before, he thought, it would have felt like static. Like trying to receive a signal on a blocked channel. The castle was broadcasting and I couldn't receive it. But now you can, Flitwick said. Now I can, Harry confirmed. He moved to the center of the room again and looked at the 4 walls and the inscription running around them and felt the castle's awareness beneath his feet like a sleeping heartbeat. Professor, I need to tell you something. Flitwick looked at him with the full attention of a very intelligent man who'd been recalibrating all morning and was prepared for another adjustment. There's a presence in the castle that shouldn't be here, Harry said. I found it this morning in the castle's awareness. Third floor corridor, right side. It's been here since the term began. Flitwick's expression changed. What kind of presence? Dark, Harry said simply. Voldemort's remnant, I believe. Attached to a host. The silence in the rune-covered room was absolute. A host, Flitwick repeated. On staff, Harry said. I have a strong suspicion about who, but I'd rather confirm before I name them. Harry, Flitwick stopped. Started differently. You understand what you're describing? Yes, Harry said. The Philosopher's Stone is in the protection chambers below the third-floor trapdoor. Voldemort's remnant is here and it's looking for a way to get to it. At some point before the end of term, the remnant is going to make an attempt. I'd rather that not happen. I'll go to the headmaster, tell Dumbledore, Harry said, and I'd appreciate being part of the conversation when you do. Not informed about it afterward. In the room. Flitwick looked at him for a long moment. Harry looked back. The blue-white light from the rune inscription lit them both evenly. You've been doing considerably more than your first-year coursework, Flitwick said. I've been trying to understand where I am, Harry said. And what I have responsibility for. And you believe you have responsibility for this. This castle woke me up when I walked through its doors, Harry said. It showed me the vault. It opened this room. It guided me to Godric Gryffindor's portrait at 5 this morning. Yes. A pause. I have responsibility for this. Flitwick was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with a precision that communicated several layers of meaning at once, I will arrange the meeting with the headmaster this afternoon. You will be present. And Harry, he paused at the door, I have taught for 41 years. In those 41 years I have encountered, by my own reckoning, perhaps 5 students who did wandless transfiguration before their second year. What you are doing in my classroom is not in that category. What you are doing in my classroom is not in any category I have a name for. He looked at Harry steadily. I say that not to make you self-conscious, but because you should know that I am paying attention, and that attention is respectful. Thank you, Professor, Harry said. Flitwick left. Harry stood in the middle of the rune room for another minute. You're welcome, he thought at the castle, because someone should probably say it. The room's ambient light warmed, just slightly, for a moment. Dumbledore's office at 3 o'clock. The bird, the phoenix, he knew now, Fox, he'd looked it up, watched Harry from its perch with the intelligent attention of something that was neither decorating the room nor merely occupying it. Harry looked at it directly and it held his gaze and he had the odd impression of something ancient and entirely benign regarding him with the sort of recognition that suggested it had seen many people come through this room and was deciding what category he fit into. It appeared to decide favorably. It made a sound, low and a single note, that resonated in Harry's chest exactly like the Four-Founder inscription. Dumbledore noticed. Of course he noticed. Fawkes doesn't sing for students, he said. I've been having that kind of week, Harry said, and sat down. Flitwick was already seated, he'd come up before Harry and had clearly been briefing Dumbledore, because Dumbledore had the specific quality of a man who has received information and is in the process of deciding how to feel about it. He looked at Harry with those careful eyes. Phileas tells me you found the room, Dumbledore said. The compact room, Harry said. Yes. The castle showed it to me. And that you've located a hostile presence in the castle, Dumbledore said, and now his voice was very careful indeed. Third floor, Harry said. Right corridor off the main staircase. The presence is Voldemort's remnant, soul fragment or something of that structure, attached to a host. The host is Quirinus Quirrell. He said it plainly and watched Dumbledore's face. Dumbledore was still for a long moment. Not surprised, Harry had a feeling Dumbledore was not entirely surprised, but something else. Working through it. What leads you to? I extended my awareness through the castle's network, Harry said. The wrongness concentrated at the third-floor corridor, and when I triangulated from there it pointed consistently to Quirrell's position during the periods I tracked. He paused. He also never turns his back. I noticed it during the first week and thought it was a habit. It isn't. There's something attached to the back of his head. Dumbledore's expression settled into something that was neither evasion nor admission. You have been busy, he said, which was, Harry thought, the second time he'd said that. There's a philosopher's stone in the protection chambers below that floor, Harry said. Flitwick looked sharply at Dumbledore. So that was information Flitwick hadn't had. Nicholas agreed to, Dumbledore began. Is it safe there? Harry said. If Quirrell is host to a Voldemort remnant that has been in this castle since September, the protection chambers are not the obstacle everyone assumed they were. The protections are good, Harry said. I don't doubt that. But the person hosting Voldemort has been walking the castle freely for 2 months and hasn't reached the stone yet. Which means either the protections have held so far, or Voldemort hasn't been ready to make his attempt yet. He looked at Dumbledore. The second option is the more alarming one. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. You believe Voldemort is waiting? I think Voldemort's remnant is learning the layout, Harry said. Building strength. The soul fragment would have been weak when it first attached to Quirrell. That kind of fragmentation takes an enormous amount of dark magic, and the remnant has been diminished since my parents. It's been 2 months. It's been feeding off a willing or unwilling host in a building full of magical children. A pause. It's stronger than it was in September. The office was very quiet. Fawkes made another soft sound. What do you want to do about it? Dumbledore said, and something had shifted in his voice. The management quality, the careful shepherd quality, was less present. He was asking a genuine question. Remove the stone from the castle, Harry said. Today. Send it somewhere safer, another Gringotts vault, a different country, anywhere that isn't here. Without the stone as a target, Quirrell's usefulness to Voldemort is limited. The remnant has nowhere to go and nothing to gain by staying. And Quirrell himself? Flitwick said. Needs to be treated, Harry said. If the attachment is voluntary, then he needs to face consequences through proper legal channels. If it's involuntary, he paused, then he's a victim and he needs medical intervention. Either way, having him continue to teach is not a sustainable situation. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and Harry had the impression of someone making several decisions simultaneously. The stone, he said. I can arrange its removal tonight. Fawkes, he looked at the phoenix, can carry it. Nothing Voldemort in any form can touch a phoenix. Tonight, Harry said. Tonight, Dumbledore confirmed. And Quirrell, I will arrange for him to be examined. Privately, and with appropriate medical support on hand. I want to know what you find, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. Not of course, or I'll see what's appropriate. Just yes. And the compact room, Harry said. I'd like it left accessible. It is your room, in every way that the Founder's Compact makes it yours, Dumbledore said. I have no standing to restrict your access to it. Harry nodded. He stood. One more thing, he said. The prophecy. Dumbledore's expression didn't change. But something in it deepened. Godric told me there was one, Harry said. He didn't tell me what it said. Morgan Le Fay apparently wrote a theoretical framework around it 1500 years ago, which I found in the vault, and which suggests she was watching the same probable future that generated the prophecy. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. I'm not asking you to tell me the wording tonight. But I want you to know that I'm aware it exists, and that when you decide I need to know it, the decision should be based on my actual readiness and not on whether knowing it changes my utility to your plan. Dumbledore looked at him. Because Morgan's argument, Harry said, is that knowing it is fine, as long as I understand it as a description of a possible person rather than a command to be a specific person. He paused. I understand that already. So when you're ready. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, with an expression that was not quite grief and not quite pride and was in some way both at once. When I'm ready, he said. Thank you, Harry said, and left. The stone was gone by 8 that evening. Harry knew because the particular wrongness he'd been tracking shifted, changed quality, as if the thing it was hunting had been removed from the equation. It didn't leave. But it changed. The focused purposefulness of the presence on the 3rd floor became something more aimless, and aimless was less dangerous. Not harmless. Less dangerous. He told Hermione at dinner, in the compressed shorthand. She read it, looked up, looked relieved and then immediately more worried, which was Hermione's typical response to having one problem resolved. The relief made room for the next problem. Quirrell, she said, very quietly. Dumbledore will handle it tonight or tomorrow, Harry said. What if the attachment has already, she hesitated, affected him to the point where he can't be separated from it safely? Then Pomfrey and the people Dumbledore brings in will make that assessment, Harry said. And if Voldemort's remnant escapes the host before they can, it's a fragment, Harry said. Diminished. Without the stone it can't do what it came here to do, and without a host it can't do much of anything. It's a piece of a soul that's already been ripped apart. It's not nothing, but it's not a war. Yet, Hermione said. Yet, Harry agreed. Which is why November 15th matters. The Wizengamot. The legal architecture. All of that. He looked at her. Voldemort isn't the only thing to think about. He's the loudest thing. But if the whole system that lets someone put suppressions on me at 15 months old, that lets Sirius Black sit in Azkaban for 10 years without a trial, that let a Board of Governors member waltz into the school and try to co-opt an orphan first year, if that whole system stays broken, then however this ends with Voldemort, the thing he was fighting against is still corrupt. Hermione looked at him steadily. So both things at once, she said. Both things at once, he confirmed. Always both things at once. That's the actual work. The news about Quirrell came Friday morning. Not through official channels, through Percy Weasley, who had been on prefect duty near the hospital wing and had seen Madame Pomfrey and 2 people he didn't recognize go into a room and emerge, 40 minutes later, with the specific body language of people who have done something difficult and are processing it. Quirrell had been placed in the hospital wing under observation. His defense against the dark arts classes were suspended indefinitely. A visiting professor would cover the subject. Dumbledore's announcement at breakfast was brief and uninformative in a way that communicated to everyone paying attention that it was meant to be uninformative, and that the specifics were not going to be shared. Harry knew what had happened. He didn't need the specifics confirmed. He went to the compact room during his free period and sat on the floor in the center of it with the four-script inscription running around him, and he thought about Quirrell, about whether the attachment had been voluntary, about what it had cost the man either way. He found he couldn't be angry at Quirrell. Frightened of what Quirrell had been hosting, yes. Angry at the presence that had used the man as a tool, yes. But at Quirrell himself, it was too complicated for anger. He sat there for an hour and let the inscription hum around him and didn't think about the Wizengamot or Lucius Malfoy's legal challenge or August Longbottom's counterfilings or anything strategic at all. Just sat with what had happened in this school and what it meant and how he felt about it. How he actually felt, not how he was performing feeling. He was 11. The thing living in his school had killed his parents. It had been using a man as a coat all term while Harry sat in classes 15 feet away. It still existed, somewhere, diminished and homeless and nothing like defeated. He sat with all of that without trying to make it manageable. Then, when he was done, he got up and went to find Neville. He found Neville in the greenhouse, because that was where Neville consistently went when he needed quiet. Professor Sprout gave him free access in a way that was both a practical arrangement. Neville was genuinely useful there, and also a form of kindness that Sprout administered without making it seem like kindness. He was repotting something with deep purple flowers when Harry came in. Quirrell, Neville said, without looking up from the pot. Yeah, Harry said. He sat on an upturned crate. How did you know? I didn't, Neville said. But I knew something had happened yesterday evening. The way people were moving in the corridors was different. And you have a face you make when something has resolved, but not in the way you'd have preferred. What face is that? Harry said. Like you've won an argument but the person is still wrong in a way that isn't fixable, Neville said. He patted soil around the purple flowers with practiced care. Are you all right? I think so, Harry said. It's strange. Removing the threat was the right thing to do and I don't second-guess the decision. But it isn't satisfying, exactly. Because the thing that was in Quirrell isn't gone. It's just gone from here. But you bought time, Neville said. Yes. Time is the thing you keep buying, Neville said. Time for the trial. Time for the Wisengamot session. Time to build the things that need to be built. He looked up from the plant, soil on his hands. My gran always says the most important battles are the ones that happen before anyone draws a wand. She's right, Harry said. She'd be pleased to hear you say that, Neville said. She'd also tell you it was obvious and that you should have figured it out sooner. Harry laughed. It came easier now than it had at the start of term. Less like an unused joint and more like something that just happened. 9 days, Harry said. Until the session. Are you ready? Neville said. Harry thought about it honestly. Not performative confidence and not false modesty. Actually considered whether he was ready. Augusta's legal architecture is solid, he said. The Gringotts certification is airtight. The active inheritance claim is filed and logged and past the point where Malfoy's challenge can reach it. I know every house's history, every Wisengamot position they historically held, every relationship between them and the other voting members. Hermione has prepared briefing notes on every living Wisengamot member that would make professional lobbyists weep. He paused. I'm 11 and I've never been to a Wisengamot session and I'm going to walk in there and claim 16 seats and force a trial onto the agenda. So, ready? Neville said. Yes, Harry said. I'm ready. Neville nodded, with the calm of someone who had evaluated the claim and found it accurate. He went back to his plant. Harry sat on the crate and watched the greenhouse light go slow and golden through the glass, and felt the castle around him like a second skin, familiar now, unmistakable, his. Neville, he said. Yeah. When this is done, the session, the trial, all of it. I want to do something about the Lestranges. He said it quietly and directly. Not immediately. Not until I understand the legal mechanism better. But I'm telling you now so you know I haven't forgotten. Neville set his trowel down very carefully. I know you haven't, he said. But thank you for saying it. They should be where they are, Harry said. They should stay where they are. And the people trying to get them out should find that significantly more difficult than they've been expecting. Neville looked at his hands, at the soil under his nails, at the purple flowers standing straight in their new pot. Okay, he said. Good. The second letter from Morgause's portrait arrived on Sunday, not a letter exactly, but a message delivered through the castle itself, through the specific quality of awareness Harry had been developing, a direction, a pull, the castle saying here, now, this with the patient insistence of something that had been waiting a long time and had learned that waiting didn't mean being passive. He went back to the portrait. She was looking at him when he arrived. You removed the threat, she said. Dumbledore removed the stone, Harry said. I identified the problem. That is not a small distinction, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. She was quiet for a moment. I want to tell you something about Morgan, she said. Something that isn't in the records in the vault, because she didn't write it down. She told me. Harry sat on the floor. The theoretical text, the one about prophecy, she didn't write it for an academic audience, Morgause said. She wrote it for one person. She'd seen enough in the temporal resonance work to know approximately when that person would live, approximately what they'd be facing, and what the most dangerous mistake they could make would be. What mistake? Harry said. Letting the prophecy become the story, Morgause said. The prophecy describes someone who defeats the Dark Lord. Morgan's warning was, don't make defeating the Dark Lord the point. Don't reduce yourself to the function the prophecy describes. Because then the prophecy controls you, Harry said. Because then the prophecy controls you, she confirmed. The prophecy is accurate, she believed. The person it describes will defeat what it says they'll defeat. But that person is, if they're the right person, larger than the prophecy. The prophecy is one sentence of a longer story. Don't let it be the whole story. Harry looked at the painted woman who had known Morgan Le Fay, who had watched Arthur's Britain come apart at its beautiful seams, who had been sitting in this corridor for a very long time holding a piece of her sister's wisdom for whoever came along who needed it. Thank you, he said. Both of you. For waiting. We did not experience it as waiting, she said. Portraits experience time differently. A pause, and then something that was almost a smile. But you are welcome, Harry Potter. He got up. He had a Wisengamot session in 8 days and a session briefing with Augusta in the morning and a letter from Sirius to write tonight and 3 weeks of preparation notes to review and 16 houses whose full history he was still cross-referencing with Hermione. He had, he thought, what he needed. He walked back through the castle, which breathed around him like it always did now, steady and enormous and alive, and he didn't feel small inside it. He felt, for the first time since he could remember, exactly large enough.